Hello and welcome to another episode of the Symposium podcast. This time it's the second episode of our Sorcerer's Crusade series. This time we've gathered the same panel as before with the potential fourth member of our merry angry leftist crew that will continue to talk about all things Sorcerer's Crusades and other tangents that I'm sure will come up, and advertising and shameless plugging, that too. So today, without further ado, we have today gathered, as usual, my brilliant and experienced co-host Phil Brigadon, that actually writes
Hello.
things
Uh,
and makes things for a living, and we have Victor, an amazingly cool person who's up and coming. He's hungry.
Hello.
And today we're going to focus most of the Sorcerer's Crusade related portion of the episode on two books that I have taken the liberty to read again, mostly reading the first one and then skimming quickly through the second one because of time issues. The Swashbuckler's Handbook, or Swashbuckler's Guide, depending on, I'm bad with names, and the Infernals and the Path of Scream, which one of these books is very topical because of projects that are being worked on, which is why we're linking it in subtly here, which is why I'm telling people. Anyway, so Phil, since you actually were a part of developing and writing these books, you can tell us
I am the part of, with Infernalism, the Path of Screams. I am the part of writing and developing those books. That one's
details.
that one's all mine.
Yeah.
And with
Okay. So speaking of
Go
that, what is it with you and going over like, oh, what I'm going to write the heavy, like psychologically scarring books that are going to leave me depressed later.
a big part of it is I just I know what I want. I know what I don't want, and I hate to say I don't trust anyone else with certain subject matter. So, and I think we've talked about this on previous episodes. I have personal experience with people using malignant magic, and I had some friends who were badly damaged by a cult back in college, and I've seen and known what people can do by practicing these sorts of things, whether or not you believe in demons, devils, extra physical entities, whatever is immaterial. The damage that people inflict on themselves and on other people while practicing this sort of thing is real. I've seen it. Um, Therefore, I never want to say, "Hey, this is cool. Y'all should practice this." Mwahaha. Won't that be a neat role playing experience? Because and we've talked about this in previous episodes as well, and I've written about it extensively on my blog. I do believe that, especially when you're dealing with an interactive entertainment, that an artist or a media outlet has a certain responsibility to have to decide where the lines are with regards to what they invite their audience to like, or invite their audience to experience. And I believe completely in pushing boundaries, but I also believe that you have to be, when you decide to push boundaries, you have to be careful about how and when you do it. And we were seeing the blowback of that sort of situation, recently with the
A
whole
certain,
uh,
certain white wolfy situation.
yeah, exactly. And that's the situation there is a perfect example of why I don't trust anybody else to write these things. I know what I have in mind. I know where my limits are. I have a very strong sense of accountability and responsibility with regards to the things that I work on, and I know I'm not going to exploit them, just to sell books.
So
Um,
you're
but
being the
sorry.
hero that we need. Is that what you're saying?
Uh,
You
I,
need
I
a watchful guardian to make sure that the Befandi aren't turned into sexy evil, or that infernalism becomes the hip new street drug that everyone's talking about.
Yeah, I did in the case of the Book of the Fallen, I did trust Jacqueline Brick to collaborate with me on that one, because when we met virtually and started talking, and she'd mentioned that she was interested in in the Nefendi. I said, "What are you drawn to in that?" And we started talking, and between those conversations and the things that she was posting in terms of her own creations and her own activism, I was like, okay, well, let's do also something she wrote for Cult, which was the thing that convinced me to hire her, and she absolutely won my trust and my respect with those pieces. And so I said, okay, you I trust to work on with with this, and I would have trusted Rochelle, who I collaborated with on Revelations of Dark Mother, but other than that, I trust me, and as we've
Everyone
also
with confidence.
well, and as we've talked about also on previous episodes, I keep a large group of people, you two among them, around me to keep me honest and make sure that I'm not screwing things up. For people who haven't heard those discussions, I have a brain trust for every project that I do. I keep several dozen people close by looking, yeah, and I show them things and I go, what do you think of this? What do you think of this? Did I screw this up? Does this work? Does this work? And Carl and Victor have both been, and Rochelle for that matter, have been part of that process several times. And uh,
There's a lot
with
of
the
really brilliant and smart and young and not young and people from different ethnicities and cultures and everything gathered in this awesome brain trust. And there's me.
Yeah,
And I nagged my way on there somehow. Feel that like there's a lot of brilliant people, and I can attest to that. They keep Phil honest, and then I come and spout my asinine ideas every now and then.
Well, and yeah, I was going to say, especially with Book of the Fallen, it struck me how much, with a lot of with a couple of the other groups I've been on, it's you'll post something, you'll ask for questions and feedback, and it's kind of, it can be a little bit abstract, but you're definitely getting a broad array of perspectives. But with Book of the Fallen, it was so, here's this text, I need you all to read it. There was just a lot of feedback and a lot of back and forth, and I loved seeing how rapidly you were editing and applying the ideas and feedback you were getting, and it really did make a big difference in the development of the book. I could tell that just from what you shared with that group. It's a great model.
Thank you, and thank you for being part of it, both of you. And
I sucked my way in there at the end. I came with some suggestions about the one side of the modern family that I like. If I was like writing in a family book, the part that I would focus on, not to spoil things, would not be the traditional, not the traditional people you would think of when you're thinking about devil worshippers. I would be focusing on what I would call the modern counterpart to that kind of people. Mainly douchebags on the internet.
Well, and my focus. As folks will see when the book finally comes out, the Defendi are not what people are expecting at all.
No.
So now let's elegantly segue back to Infernals and Path of Screams, which does take in some ways, a more traditional, since back in time, a much more traditional look at them than you would see later. And I have to say, I enjoy the book because it doesn't make, like, Infernalism does not become gore-fest heavy or sexy, because that's the two versions I've always seen of Infernalism in a lot of White Wolf stuff. Is it either becomes gore-fest, Bali book, and or sexy Bali book. And I enjoyed the Bali book, but that was elements there that you could criticize.
Yeah.
Yeah, there was somebody. I'll keep it nameless who said it, but there was somebody who when they were working on the Bali book and in house, they were just like, yeah, okay, Clan Book Bali, aka Evil Loves Bugs.
Yeah. I mean, I'm never gonna forget that opening fiction ever.
Oh God, that was amazing. That was like reading the entire Eternal Hearts erotica novel again.
That's okay.
I read I was great entertainment.
Yeah.
Saved afterwards, but that's how it goes. That opening fiction was great. I died.
Yeah, but I mean, Infernalism really doesn't go that route. One of the things that I really appreciate about Infernalism is that it occasionally says, is this evil? The Hallel write-up is in there. And on one hand, you read Hallel, and in a lot of contexts, it's like, oh yeah, they accused him of being an Effendi, but realistically, but here it is in this book, and it's still left with that big question mark. But I love that that's there. I love that you have, the text about how frustrated Western, church leaders are when they look to other cultures and they don't understand the axis of evil. They don't understand the way what is good and evil, what is celestial and infernal, but like it's there. And it's such an elegant way of not glossing over the evil in other cultures, but also not prescriptively dictating what is evil. I just thought it was something that I wish was in a lot of other books dealing with similar topics.
I mean, I'm just saying that like the Christian historical answer when like how do we define what's evil beings in these cultures was to just make everything evil. The god, the old gods, the spirits, everything. Oh yeah, they were actually just demons. that was
Yeah.
Response. Like going over to the Sami people, for example, they're like a animistic. Like they're basically like the Scandinavian equivalent of Native Americans in the sense of the cultural role they've had. Anyway, they had their own religion and gods and everything, and they just came out they're all demons, actually.
Yeah, that's one where I wish that we had Rochelle in the conversation, because that was Witches and Pagans was the book where what we started wanting to do was we wanted to present the more a more in-depth version of or vision rather of paganism than what we find even in most modern neo-pagan sources, and including dealing with the Sami, dealing with the Lapps, dealing with the Slavs, and the fact that it's not just all happy huggy tree worship until the Christians show up. That some of this stuff really is dark, scary, nasty. Human sacrifice and so forth, and that doesn't necessarily make it evil, but it does present a very different moral axis than what we're used to.
I mean, not to mangle a Jesus quote, but I mean the one without sin throw the first stone. The religion hasn't done human sacrifice. Be the first one to throw a stone here. Like the Christians could pretend they've never done that, but we know.
Yeah, they just called it slavery.
Yeah, yes, they did.
But yeah, one of the contrasts to talking about the development process, one of the big contrasts between Infernalism and the Book of the Fallen is that Infernalism, I basically barricaded myself into my office and just wrote, and didn't have a brain trust on that one for a variety of personal reasons. I was about the angriest I've ever been in my life when I was writing that book, and I think it comes through in the book.
That part comes true.
And
especially
I did,
especially the Hellsmith wrote reflects your anger, I think, because they're like, oh, hide souls into objects. Why? Because we can.
Yeah,
That's right. That much more of a benefit than just making a normal wonder. But we are going to forge souls into bricks because we're dead.
yeah, that was my idea too. In Wraith, that one came from me.
You wouldn't want to blame for that. I've been wondering.
That was me.
It's funny. It was a couple months ago. I actually had some conversation with Simon, I think it was, about he had never read Wraith. I talked him into getting a copy of Wraith 20, because I was going to order a bunch of them to save on shipping for people. He was reading it, and he got to that part in Wraith 20 where they talk about one soul to one item in the bricks in the road, and he read it and he messaged me and he was like, yeah, I feel like it's still too subtle for the player base. Like, I don't know. Maybe we could be more overt, because I'm still seeing a bunch of players who would miss this and think, oh yeah, this is cool.
Mm-hmm. The cool part that okay, so there's now I'm going to get depressed. I mean, we talk about how much we hate fandoms all the time, Victor. But I was just telling you that people now are like reading Wraith for like, oh, they forged the road out of souls. Cool.
There is someone. There is someone.
Oh,
every once in a while, I write. Well, and one of the reasons going back to the Book of the Fallen, one of my key design. One of my key design foundations for that book was to make it so that I've run into so many people who think the Nefandi are cool and neat, and you should be able to play them and all of that. And I said I wanted to de-glamorize the Nefandi. There are going to be people who want to play them anyway, and I did include information for if you're a storyteller and you really want to have Nefandi and you want to have player character Nefandi, here's what you do. If you're a player and you want to, here you go. I'm not going to encourage this, but I can't stop you. It's your game ultimately, but I'm not endorsing it. But I wanted to make sure that it didn't just become another, another Sabbat or another Black Spiral Dancers where playing evil is neato. Because as I've said, and I've said this in previous episodes as well, 9-foot tall lycanthropic killing machines do not exist. Undead corpses with superpowers do not exist. Ghosts might exist, but they're probably not like the ghosts in Wraith. People do practice black magic, and I've seen the results. And I'm not encouraging people to do that shit. And I'm not going to tell them, hey, it's cool. It's just another neat role playing experience, because I have seen personally where that leads. And I'm not going. I don't ever want. I don't ever want to put anything in my books that encourages people to think that that's just a different point of view. That being said, I also didn't want in either book to present a one-dimensional mwahaha example of evil, where evil is this mustache twiddling cartoon that's other people. In fact, that was a big part of Book of the Fallen, and for that matter of Infernals and the Path of Screams, going, so this is how you could wind up here, this is how you could wind up here, this is how you could do this thing. These are all perfectly understandable reasons for one, for doing things that other people will see as evil, and that are, provably in terms of mage, do lead to you dealing with demons, do lead to you maybe winding up in a hell, do wind up with you sacrificing babies or whatever. And these are how perfectly understandable daily feelings, daily choices can lead somebody to the moment where, as I said in the Book of the Fallen, where you're standing over your weeping lover, wondering how that bruise got on her jaw. And I really wanted, in both books, I really wanted to confront people with the idea that evil is in all of us. It's not an abstract other.
Evil just be something you could defeat in a boss encounter. That's what you're saying here.
Yeah, evil lives in all of us. And it is our duty, I believe, to choose to not be that. I said in.
But shouldn't vampires didn't actually do it, and it's all actually. Michael Porter hired me anyway. But I could do a sarcastic deck without issue. I feel no against that. Anyway, not to throw too much shade. Anyway, so that's what I liked about all of the write-ups for both Infernals and for Book of the Fallen. Is that yes, you make the thing you're confronting here is human evil. Yeah, inhuman evil also exists in there, but it all is rooted in human evil, and human evil doesn't have vampire or werewolf puppet masters or fairy lords or whatever coaxing that out. It's just people. Some people are just dicks for various reasons, and that potential exists in everyone.
Yeah, and I mean that really gets to the core of something that I always do when I run Mage. Mage is the one game where I treat the characters like humans. I run Mage with the idea that mages are, kind of a souped up game, exaggerated representation of human excellence, and the real world people that reach out and go way beyond what's possible. And maybe, it goes a little farther with the magic system and whatnot, and it gets a little flashy, but fundamentally technocrats exist.
It's just you're playing Leonardo da Vinci, really.
Exactly. Or, you're playing Aleister Crowley, or, the mystic side and the technocratic side are both there. But if you step back and you approach mages that way, then you look at the Nefandi and you go, can I find them in the real? Oh, yes, I can. There they are. I mean,
that's a good start.
Yeah, I mean, it's not like playing a Bali. I'm honestly unsettled by how many people I see who are like, I love playing Bali, and I'm like, I'll play like a cartoonish D&D evil lich every now and then because it's for the lulz. Oh, really?
Really, the people who put bugs up people's rectums from inside.
Yeah.
But I did. Okay, I'm going to say something. I actually liked the Bali book, but that's because, you know, they're horrifying monsters who believe they're right, and you know that because most people don't just kill people because because I am evil. Like they have a reasoning behind why they're doing the shit they do. That reasoning is horrifying, and they're evil and horrific monsters. And I enjoyed that because there was a path in Vampire called Path of the Evil Revelation, which literally was like the entire path can be summed up as "I am evil." Like you literally thought that. And I'm like, nobody thinks that way.
That was mine too. That came out of Vampire Dark Ages. Jen Hartshorn and I did that one for Vampire Dark Ages first edition.
Yeah.
Phil, I won't.
Well, we had decided that you especially in a medieval mindset, a medieval European mindset, in which you're dealing with where you're dealing with a theology and a philosophy that is radically different than what we consider theological and
like people
today.
thought that Satan was an active threat in the world.
Yeah.
At that time, like it was actually legally required for you to believe that magic existed and that evil witch cults that worshipped Satan was an actual threat to human existence.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I once, like one semester, I had a course literally about like the history of magic in Europe specifically, and the witch trials was a big part of that, and how it was literally written into law that it's illegal to not believe that this is a thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you have various people, including some theologians, including the early medieval Catholic Church, where they were going, no, this is silly. This whole witch thing is silly, and then you have Kramer and Springer coming along and going, no, actually, I mean, when you look at the Malleus Maleficarum, it was initially condemned by the Pope who commissioned it, and it was initially suppressed by the Catholic Church, and then it was seized on by the Protestants, and the Protestants started burning witches. At which point, some of the Catholic theologians, if nothing else, started realizing that there was money to be made in their witch fires, so they adopted it as well. But at various points in the medieval world, medieval European world, the idea that there were
period to be fair to them, like it's the early medieval period. It's when as you pointed out, the church was like, yeah, witches, silly. It's later that it comes in.
Yeah, ironically, and this is one of those many places where Americans screw up their medieval history or their view of medieval history. We have this image of the Dark Ages or the Middle Ages that historically are actually talking about shit people were doing in the Renaissance. That's far worse.
I mean, like
all those
witches and most definitely Renaissance. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean all the Baroque public torture and shit like that. That was Renaissance period. The era where you're feeding whole families into bonfires every weekend. That's Renaissance. They weren't doing that in the Dark Ages. Also, the Dark Ages is also a complete historical fiction, but that's a whole other rant.
Well, I mean, here's the thing, Phil. Of course, the Dark Ages is real because white people weren't weren't doing it. It's not like the Islamic Golden Age was going on at the same time, and then basically, like in the caliphates, they figured out that evolution was a thing several hundred years before Darwin ever was even taught in anyone's mind. Ignoring that part, Al-Andalus never existed.
Yep. No, Al-Andalus didn't exist. No, there was nothing going on down in the Middle East. No, India was not in the middle of, its one of its greatest cultural periods. China wasn't, this like the most advanced nation, the most advanced.
Only white people have ever invented anything.
Yeah.
I'll have you know, it's not that we have stolen from everyone else and then claimed it was ours. Like, I used to be this like snotty kid in school at some point. You might have problems imagining that. And I was like, and I had a teacher who twice did this. I came in and was like, a replacement for a week. It was like, do you know who invented the printing press? Like, who invented the, print, not the, like the press itself, but like the technique to do this. And she was like, oh, it's Gutenberg. And I'm like, but the Chinese did that. Different method, but the same thing. This technique that exists, similar techniques to this that existed for centuries.
Mm-hmm. There's something I learned recently, and this is making its way into the Technocracy Reloaded. There's something I learned just recently when about 2 years ago we were at the why am I blanking? The Chinese exhibit, the Terracotta Warriors exhibit at the Pacific Science Museum. The Chinese had not only assembly lines, but repeating mechanical crossbows several hundred years before Christ.
Yeah.
Several hundred years. We don't learn this stuff. They had they had mass-produced armor. They had mass-produced vehicles. They made mass production is how they made the Terracotta Warriors in the first place. And if you read about assembly lines, you hear, oh well, Henry Ford created the assembly line. Oh, bullshit! Chinese created it 2,500 years ago.
Okay, I'm not American, but let me guess as to what your history of education was like. Okay, it might mention Mesopotamia, be like that's the first civilization, and then Egypt, and then Greeks and the Romans, and then there was the Dark Ages, and the Crusades because those Muslims were doing things, and then then the Renaissance, and then America was founded. We found America, Spanish did, conquistadors, and then the American Revolution, then French Revolution, modern times, World War II, boom. That was the history.
That's pretty accurate, actually.
Yeah, I'm more or less. I mean, we got some American Civil War. I was blessed with all of 2 weeks of World War I. But yeah, aside from that, you pretty much nailed it.
Yeah, it's because I'm not to sound like a right-wing person because this word has been completely ruined. Agendas. There are certain agendas in education. In history education specifically, it's an old academic remnant of what we consider canon and the right history, which has been written by right men for most part, which is why it's framed that way. And it's only in modern academia we're seeing that image change because we can now communicate with historians in Africa, Japan, China, and other places and get a significantly more accurate and diverse view of history. But part of the historian's role is to create the narrative, and we have created the narrative of the Western civilization. We took the flame, like the torch was lit in Greece, and it went from Rome and then around the world. Ignoring the fact that the Islamic world are just as much the heirs to the Romans and the Greeks as we are. Ignore that.
More so, really.
Yeah, way
more so. We wouldn't have got that stuff if it hadn't been for the Arabic love of scholarship and the Persian archives. We would have lost all that stuff.
Yeah, a chunk of it. Yeah, we really kept the shit we could view in a Christian way. Thomas Aquinas is loved because he was the one who figured out how to make Aristotle Christianized. Because they've been like, how the fuck do you justify Aristotle? Been wondering that for years, and then he came around and was like, I'm going to make faith into science.
I mean, there were a few people that pursued that. To sneakily pull this back around to the books, though, this was actually something that jumped out at me when I was looking at the Swashbuckler's Handbook again. And I remember this from when I was running in all the books, is maybe there were other books that did this before Swashbucklers, but I feel like this is the first book that took an overarching general topic and approached it across the world.
Yeah.
Like, you get in here and, you know, there isn't, most of the word count is Europe, but there's a solid section that's like, here's how this kind of impacts the other major parts of the world. And
intrigue in China. Here's courtly intrigue in the Caliphates. Here's courtly intrigue in India. So, and in the Americas too, even. And I was like sitting there being like gobsmacked because I didn't remember that. I like barely remember it. Like, wait, because most historical like White Wolf books were very like let's be generous and call them Euro focused.
Well, or if they acknowledged another culture, it was because the book was entirely about another culture. It wasn't about, here is a general topic and how it would play out in multiple places. And I feel like there's more of that now.
Yeah, there was, and it was, yeah, and I think you're right. And I mean, we can give you credit for this, Phil. I presume that.
Thank you.
Because Sorcerer's Crusade is where you start with the brain crust trend, isn't it?
Yeah, that's the book that's the book where I was able to actually start using that approach, because social media was starting to get to the point where, and also I'd built up I built up a fairly international group of people, because to people who don't know what social media was like in the late 90s, the internet the internet in the 90s barely existed. The only people that you would encounter on it were people who had the money and the money and access to get very expensive technology, and then pay enormous phone bills because you were paying by the minute to access dial-up connections. So although you could you could correspond with other people who were rich enough to have computer access at other parts of the world, one, you had to have a group where you could meet people who you didn't actually know, and two, everybody had to have that certain level of access to be able to communicate with you at all. It was completely different than what we have now. Uh, it started to shift around the late 90s, where there were enough people starting to get online. The cost of the technology and the cost of access were dropping, so more people could get on. And then by the point where I worked on Sorcerer's Crusade, I knew a number of people. I'd been to, been to Canada, been to Germany. I've been to the UK a number of times, and I had friends in France. I had a Chinese friend in Atlanta, where I was living at the time. I had friends who were from Egypt and from Iran, and so I was talking to them online as well as in person. And because we suddenly had this toolkit where I could make a group and I could talk to them or they could talk to each other, we started doing that. And I said, with Sorcerer's Crusade, I said, I want this to be as historically authentic as possible, not necessarily historically accurate. I mean, you've got airships and dragons and and ogre armies and shit like that. But I said I wanted to make it historically authentic enough so that the fantasy made sense.
Mm-hmm.
And even the fantasy elements are rooted in real life legendary and real life practices and so forth. About the most extreme thing that I threw in there that has nothing to do with real history at all is Tazgul the Insane.
Yeah, I knew we were going to say Tazgul.
And that was me going full D&D in there. Although even then I was building on the both the medieval legends and the medieval reality of the Huns and the the Huns and the Mongols, who would periodically, go, okay, we need some more resources. Let's go take them from those people down there, because we're bigger and nastier than they are. And I just kind of took that to its logical extreme. But that was the first time that the toolkit existed for me to, contact Oliver in Germany and go, hey, how do you say it in German? How do you say this thing? What would the German name for this thing be? Talk to my friend James, the Chinese friend in Atlanta, and go, what would be the culturally authentic Chinese translation for this? Before that, all we had to work with was were phrase books and foreign language dictionaries, which is why there's so many horrific mistranslations in early White Wolf books, because you didn't have the opportunity to call up or email your friend in Germany and ask how it should actually be said. Now we have that. And that's a huge toolkit that I think everybody involved in the hobby should be, well, the hobby in the medium, everybody should be using that toolkit now. But what I wanted to do with Sorcerer's Crusade is, I said I wanted it to be historically and culturally authentic as I could possibly make it, given the tools, and then add the fantasy onto that in an organic way. And that's what we did, and it worked, so I kept doing it. My dad said, this is one of the greatest compliments I think I've ever had from my dad, because my dad was also, he inspired my love of history in many ways. And I'd sent him a copy of Sorcerer's Crusade, and he said, this is a history textbook disguised as fantasy, isn't it? I said, yeah, it kind of is.
Before we continue, going back onto the Swashbuckler book, I'm just asking, will we ever see a Tesco comeback tour? I'm asking for friends. Or
I have.
Tesco is one of those basically, not, I was going to say crap classic, but that's not what I mean. It's just amazing. It's the most magey thing ever. Sometimes you just bring in the crazy, and it's great. And I mean, as you pointed out, rooted in real life, like in the historic realities and mythologies of the time, so to speak.
And he is also totally from a fantasy hero game that I used to run.
I just want to know, because I want that, because I want to see Tesco just show up in Modern Mage.
I might with the
everything just showing up, and then you have Daedalus just coming after him or something. I don't know.
Yeah, with the what's the word I want? With the Storyteller's Vault, I may be doing some more Sorcerer's Crusade books. It really depends a lot on what happens the next few years, both in terms of who's doing what for what publisher and who's paying me to do it, and also how my own projects. Because one of my conditions back when I started working on Mage 20 was that I keep the opportunity that I keep the time to work on my own project as well, because ultimately, and we've talked about this before, the primary reason. Well, yeah, power chords. My novels, Red Shoes, which is shopping again now, and one of the reasons that I started having issues with White Wolf back in the 90s was because I was putting every waking hour of creativity and work into something that didn't belong to me and never would. So I do not want to make that do not want to make that mistake again. So I have a lot of plans and a lot of ideas. How many of them will actually come to fruition, where and when? It's going to depend. I'm still trying to make up for lost time that I lost over the last year and a half to the illnesses and deaths of Raven and Coyote. So, and the aftermath of that. But I do have plans to do more Sorcerer's Crusade stuff, whether or not that's through Onyx Path or Storyteller's Vault or whatever. I'd love to. Sorcerer's Crusade is still, of all the things that I have created, that's the one I'm most proud of. I want to do more with it.
Yeah, I mean, and Sorcerer's Crusade is just an amazing line. And the thing that really struck me when I was looking through these two books again and refreshing for the record is Sorcerer's Crusade pulled something off that the other time period pieces didn't do so much, in that there's a lot of stuff in these books that is very, very valid for a modern setting. Ars Cupidae has really wormed its way into modern Mage in a pretty profound way, and it's been a huge addition.
I would say that Ars Cupidae is probably the most relevant art in modern Mage, really, like in M20 at least. Like,
Thank you.
I mean, like not to spoil anything that I don't know if I'm at liberty to say, but the things related to Ars Cupidae and Ars Cupidae itself and so on is very much a common theme in a lot of M20 stuff, because I mean, you put, as you said, like vampires aren't real, werewolves aren't real, people who black magic, those people exist. Whether magic is real or not, that's a different discussion. But people who use social media manipulation, people who bribe people who make sure that money flows in a certain direction, people who put up marketing billboards. Those people are real. They're very
Yeah,
much,
they are.
very much real. I'm just saying the corporate consultants and the CEOs are actually real people. As weird as that might seem. And I think that's where Mage sometimes works, is that despite the fact that it's the same game where you have Umbral spaceships and clockwork tanks and the Great Space Butterfly, which I'm sure will one day appear in a book. So I'm just saying, lobbying for Space Butterfly inclusion. I might have to write the Space Butterfly Craft of Mages. I'm going to do it for Storyteller's World. You people wouldn't believe the lengths I'm willing to go for random jokes. I would consider writing an entire RPG game just based around random in jokes I have with people. They can try game based around the in jokes. Like the Swedes would be the evil ones in that game. They would have evil Swede magic, and there would be the wizard that Don Quixote sees and thinks is his arch enemy would show up, and there's corpse mooses walking around. That stems from one time I said Frankenstein was a hack because he made a person out of person parts. You should have made a moose. Everyone would like that. I'm pitching a person. I found these corpse parts. What will I do with them? Stitch together a person. But if you put those same parts together and it looks like a moose somehow, nobody would see that coming. I'm just pointing that out. Like you could have played the arms and made them look like horses. Anyway,
the Zamishi would see it coming.
Yeah, but they, Anyway,
but yeah, I mean, but to kind of go back to Swashbuckler's Handbook,
go back there.
Yeah, I mean, I love the way it approaches the topics and is relevant to the modern era. The other thing that jumped out at me about it is it has a lot of convention subgroups. Having all the high guild subgroups in this book, instead of putting them in a convention book, which is where those subgroups usually end up, it keeps them in context, and you then have all the other, setting information right there. And I could think of a couple other books where that had been done with larger groups, like She Houses and in the Shadow Court book. But even then, those write-ups were very, and here's a straight up write-up on House Leonin. But it seemed much more in context in Swashbuckler's Handbook.
It was really good.
Yeah, had that been done before? Was there any discussion about changing kind of the book design paradigm when you did that?
No, I just did it.
I mean, okay.
That might be the Artisan's Handbook. And I was going to ask about that when I saw that in Swashbucklers the other, because I remember this, but I was like, it seemed like in a lot of the different books, there was two conventions that just became the main focus conventions in each book. In the Swashbucklers Handbook, you have the High Guild and Kisifare, which are incidentally two of my favorite conventions. They're the best. And you get much more of an expansion of them and how they think and how they work and how they view magic / science and so
on. Part of it was that we were just making up a new line. Part of it was that, as I'd mentioned earlier, I was just having a field day with the Order of Reason. And part of it was that I started the work on Artisan's Handbook, but Jess Henning finished it, and so we didn't have the quite have the hive mind. Well, there was no hive mind. I was the hive mind on Infernalism and Swashbuckler's Handbook. And one of the things, and you all have seen this because you've worked in my my brain trust, but a lot of times I'll come up with a concept for a book, and I will brainstorm on that concept, and then over the course of actually writing a book and putting it together, the book will change into something very different, because as I'm working on it, I'm still adding ideas and subtracting ideas, and incorporating things that are going on while I'm working on the book. I don't do the here's the outline, we're sticking to the outline thing. I've never done that. And not as I've learned, most game designers don't work that way.
Yeah.
For me, game design is an organic and ongoing process, and so as part of that process, I keep an eye on what's going on both around me in terms of watching news, social media, talking to people, and so forth, and also in terms of what I'm feeling and what I'm thinking. As I've again, one of those other things we've mentioned in previous podcasts is I because my background is in method acting, I tend to write books and develop books from the perspective of both a person in the subject, a person from or within the subject of that book, and from the perspective of the reader, going, okay, if I bought this book, what would I want to see in it? What questions would I want to have answered in it? And so the design process changes. For me, and in the case of the handbooks for the Sorcerer's Crusade line, I wanted, and if I still do more of them, I still want to concentrate on a theme rather than a group, and the group in question being someone who, like swashbucklers or artisans, or witches and pagans for that matter, is not necessarily the big book of Verbena or the big book of the High Artisan Guild or the big book of the Cassirify, but is rather going on a type of character. I've also been doing this in Mage 20 to a less obvious extent, talking about mad scientists and witches and agents of order rather than Sons of Etherites, Verbena, and members of the New World Order, because I think that makes it more generally applicable to what people want to game, rather than telling them this is the big book about this group. I One of the things I think that I feel this is me saying it, personally, but I feel that the big trademark groups became a trap for us creatively, where it was a brilliant innovation in Vampire, but it became
But every game had to have them.
Yeah, it started.
I mean, like, I'm not saying
right. That's the point.
Yeah, that was the point. That was me, but just like when the marketing people sit down and like every game had to have them. Like I was 2 games in, to get a bit of a tangent here, but in Chronicles / New World Dark, there's 2 games I really enjoyed. It's called Guides to Signatures and Beast of Primordial, and a lot of the criticism have been that like they don't have a society. We're their big groups, like because they're like more individually and more archetype based. But like, oh, where are the Dream Eaters or whatever? Like, where are these orders and secret societies that will permeate the game and be about steal spotlight away from everything? Like, my favorite part of Mage is when I play orphans and have an orphan chronicle and just be like, yeah, screw the groups are ideals and they certainly are around, but I like Mage when it's individually charged. Let's put it that way.
Well, and it's interesting. I got into I don't want to say a fight, a strong exchange with someone on another podcast where it was a podcast about the traditions, and we got to the Dream Speakers, and I struggle with the Dream Speakers, and I'm like, okay, like I get a spiritual like RPG class, but let's be honest about the Native American like tribes and cultures and how myriad they are into themselves and how much they would not align themselves this way. And there was another guy, it was on a podcast. You can hunt it down if you want. He got upset. He was like a One True Believer first edition book, like core book. And he really pushed this idea that no, whole world, totally universal. He was just committed to the traditions being as monolithic as the original technocracy. And I mean, the technocracy isn't even that monolithic anymore. And I was just like, what? I was so taken aback. Like the conversation got awkward because I didn't know how to parse why I thought that idea was nuts.
Okay,
So-
Filmmaker. I'm just gonna have to say, Native Americans were one blob culture. Okay, like
no, I'm just gonna cut off the satire there. No, I don't even want to go down that satire road.
Saying Africa, one culture, one place. Africans are all the same, believe the same thing. Animism is a universal concept, and it is done exactly the same way. It's not like animism exists in.
No, this is literally the argument he made.
I know. I'm making an argument, but the thing is, I don't know, is it post-law? It's called, which law is it called? Where satire essentially doesn't work because
Poe's law, yeah.
Poe's law, yeah.
Here's something, and you can talk about this one all you like. Here is a definitive statement from someone who has been involved in the creation of Mage for its duration, and who has one of the few, if only, extant copies of the original pre-revision first edition draft. The groups in Mage were an arbitrary collection of groups that were that were created by committee in a period of like 2 weeks. The ones, even most of the ones in Stuart and Steve's and Chris Early's first draft, the one that was thrown out and rewritten just before the book went to editing, most of the groups are different. Several of them have been renamed. A number of them are completely different. Completely different in scope and philosophy. There is no holy writ. It's a bunch of kids made this shit up in a few weeks in order to meet a deadline, and then we figured out how to make all that stuff make sense. That's the way it worked. I know, I've been part of that process. And the idea that there was some sort of
whenever we talk about, sorry, I was going to say that seems to be the theme every time we talk about White Wolf, where we just point out that there's a bunch of kids making up shit as they run.
Yeah, it was. I mean, the Dream Speakers. Okay, this is literally because I asked the people who were in those conversations. Where did this group come from? What was the idea behind this group? The answer that I got regarding the Dream Speakers was, we wanted to have a group that could tie in with Werewolf the Apocalypse. That is literally where the concept came from. It wasn't even these are the dark-skinned mages. It was, we needed to have a group that would tie in with Werewolf the Apocalypse. The Athanatos, we needed to have a group that would tie in with Vampire. The Hollow Ones, we needed a group that was going to tie in with the whole goth punk thing.
I mean, the Hollow Ones is pretty obvious.
That's where they came from, and the Akashic Brotherhood. Steve Wick was and still is, as far as I'm aware, he's a practitioner of kung fu, and plus everybody in the office at that time, pretty much everybody in the office also played Street Fighter and Mortal Kombat when when we were on lunch break and so forth. And Steve, being actually involved with kung fu, said there has to be a kung fu group. So that's what you got. You got a kung fu group. That's where these things came from.
What was the idea for Society / Sons of Ether? Was it like, we want Frankenstein people?
In the original draft, and you can see this in the original flyer for Mage First Edition, they were called the Permitidians in that
name is better, actually.
First group. Well, the problem is Parmenides was a Greek philosopher. Bill Bridges, who has a philosophy degree, pointed out during that fevered design makeover. Bill Bridges pointed out that the philosophy that Parmenides espoused was completely the opposite of what the Etherites were supposed to be about. And so Stuart changed the name. and I'm pretty sure it was Bill Bridges who came up with the with the Sons of Ether, and he was the one who wrote the original tradition book, which was so much fun. But that was Bill wanting to bring Doc Savage and Pulp Adventure into Mage, because that would be fun.
Yeah, and I mean, the one thing I will say about the traditions that I do like, and this is more a game design thing than a narrative thing, I do like that some of them really highlight this game can be whatever you want it to be. I'll say really the traditions and the conventions collectively. The crafts and the disparates felt more like authentic character narrative inspections, but the traditions and the conventions are really a platter of which genre would you like to play. What I ran into when I ran Sorcerer's Crusade last is, and this was really the chronicle that taught me what not to do when running Mage, is you kind of have to pick your genre, look at your players, and be like, these are the groups you can play. I set the game in Venice. And I was like, we're going to do Venice. It's going to be in the city of Venice in 1501. You know, you can play tradition or convention. And I thought that was a pretty basic setup for this is going to be a swashbuckling intrigue game. Like, what else am I going to do in that setting? Man, I did not get those characters. That did not happen. I got one character that fit that mold.
Did someone bring in a Gabrielite? Just
no, everyone played traditions. No one played conventions. No one touched the Order of Reason.
That's a pity.
Yeah, well, I thought so too. You know,
I will promise you this, Victor. If you ever run Sorcerer's Crusade again, I can sneak in somehow. I promise. I will bring in a Gabrielite, and everything will be fine.
It's on my list of things to run again, but unfortunately, that list is not short.
Yeah. Welcome to the club.
And my chronicles tend to be a year minimum, so.
Anyway, just to get back to Swashbuckling, because I actually want to talk about something with Swashbucklers, because we talk about how we approach the topic and stuff. Well, cool thing about Swashbucklers, in my opinion, is that I actually think it gets subtlety better than a lot of World of Darkness books, because World of Darkness, like, I know that this might be hard to believe, but all the game lines were trying to set it up. Oh, this is a subtle world where nobody knows about. So much of, like, and it's not just the games. Like, so many of the books just they walk around. They look like fucking assassins, like stereotypical like TV assassins. They have like fucking katanas on them and like the weird trench coats, and they're like glasses inside, and like vampires would be discovered so quickly. Like just
the only two groups that I bought as staying secret were changelings and wraiths.
Yeah,
and changelings, that involves some pretty heavy systematic contrivance to make that believable.
Because most changelings do, people literally cannot perceive. Yeah.
Yeah, let's take delirium and then up it. Let's like dial it to 50.
Take delirium, up it, dial it to 50, and add this in the fact that most of the shit that the changelings deal with are imaginary, or sort of imaginary.
Well.
When
to reality.
when we were working on the magic system for Changeling in first edition, Sam Chupp and I were talking about it, and he was talking about the whole chimerical thing. I said, so somebody jumps on her chimerical dragon and goes flying into the sky. What does everybody see? And he goes, oh, well, they don't see the dragon. I said, then do they see her flying through the air on nothing? Because that's even crazier than seeing a dragon. And he's like, I don't know yet.
See, and
you have to figure this shit out. Because that's going to happen the first time somebody runs it.
Oh, and it did. It happens every time. The way I approach that is I basically run it that, yes, they see the person fly into the air, and that having a mortal see your magic, see something that's impossible and disbelieve it is a banality trigger.
Yeah, that's actually that's actually the rule, sir. So if you don't have let's say you have a chimerical plane and you don't have something like to cover it with, if you actually try to fly the plane and someone just looks up and sees you, you're gonna fall down. Because banality.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
and they actually dealt with that really elegantly in Blood Dim Tides with the Myrrh, because they had a whole section, and I loved this section. It was the best. It captured the dangers of chimerical reality better than any Changeling book, and it makes me sad because most Changeling players don't have it. It talked about one of the worst things for the Myrrh is they're going along, they're in the ocean, which is still basically not the mud ball. Like it's much more magical because humans don't live down there and they don't push their anthropic effect down there as much. And so, okay, everything's fine. And then if a ship goes by, and then suddenly the Myrrh can't breathe underwater and they die. And just like a percentage of the population dies from that every year. And I'm like, yes, this is the narrative description of what should happen to everyone. It just has more profound implications for them. And there it is in a book that just has like 2 random changeling splats that most changeling players haven't read, and it makes me sad.
Void engineered squids that just kill changeling merfolk by just flying by in underwater. That's also a thing. I remember that. But anyway, back to Swashbuckling. Why I'm saying it's something, because the game, like the book, is very good about being like, yeah, if you pull out like your knight sword and you go around and like your knightly bastard sword and you go around in your armor, people are gonna look at you like an idiot. And like I'm just gonna strike random people down. You're not gonna last. That doesn't work in a courtly environment. Like you can do that in the tavern brawls. Like you can go and stab the obvious like mook that the storyteller has conjured up for you to stab, who's drunk, obviously. That's fine. You can't do that in court. You're doing that in court,
right?
Ruined.
Well, that was one of the elements that really attracted me to the idea of the courtly intrigue. Is partly because just as a genre, I love it. And partly because I wanted to present people with something that was very period that was very period accurate, and that was a complete departure from what fantasy games. And I think this goes back to a question you had a while ago. I wanted the Swashbuckler's Handbook to be rooted in stuff that was familiar and yet present a completely different um, role-playing experience than what we normally had. I had run a swashbuckling game, which was a combination of Three Musketeers stuff and subtle intrigue back when I had my classic gaming group in and after college with Jennifer Starling and John and Laurie Roby and Gray Beaker, and I had run it in Hero System because this is 1980s. But it was a it was a historically set, or it was a historical game set in the Three Musketeers period, where every character, and this idea made it into the Sorcerer's Crusade Swashbuckler's Handbook. Every character had to have at least one secret that was not only a secret from the other characters, but was a secret from the other players. And that secret had to be something that could really damage their relationship with the group if the other people found out. And of course, naturally, I pulled those strings to make sure that the secrets would tumble out at some point, and then the players had to deal with, well, what happens when the Catholics in your group find out that you're a Huguenot, and what happens when they discover that man they've been fighting next to is a woman in disguise, and we had that sort of that tension, and between that tension between that tension where everybody knew that everybody else had secrets, and the necessity of keeping some of those secrets secret, as well as the ability to have those wild swashbuckling Three Musketeers style sword fights, made for a really really fun gaming experience. And so I wanted to put that into Swashbuckler's Handbook as well, in addition to incorporating my theater major love of Shakespeare and putting the
Yeah, there's a lot of Shakespeare stuff in Swashbuckler's Handbook.
yeah, and having that whole upstairs, the British drama upstairs, downstairs, high plot, low plot, which is in there as well, and where your story could be 1 minute you're dealing with the courtiers, and the next minute you're dealing with the servants and the stuff that the servants are doing. I said I think even now I can't think of another role-playing game source book that handles the subject quite the way we did in that book.
Our book was really good about that. I mean, it meant I mean, I'm just going to repeat shit you just said, like, because because it handles all the quarterly intrigue and stuff so much more elegantly. Like than the entire game that's supposed to be about quarterly intrigue. Vampire. Because I don't think Vampire handles it that well, to be honest, in a lot of ways. But I'm
Well, the nice thing about Mage, though, is that you can make a character and take spheres and be like, okay, I really want to do this courtly intrigue thing. I am going to make effects. I'm going to find rotes or make up rotes that, slowly cause a rumor to spread and reach the right ears, that, and things that are hyper appropriate for that setting. The problem Vampire runs into is it has fixed powers, and as much as it's meant to cover courtly intrigue, let's be honest, most people don't play that. So then the power set has to accommodate most players, and that's not a bad thing. That's just a design truth. So then when you turn around to do this, you're left with a few powers, and then you have to buy through the things that make presence worthwhile in other games to get there. And it's tough. The system's inflexible. The spheres let you take everything your character does can be appropriate to the game style.
I mean, the book was very good at finding rotes for basically every single sphere, maybe except spirit. I think that and making them fit to basically every and any aspects of courtly intrigue, like the whole secret compartment in the ring, dropping poison in the drink rotes, spreading rumors. Making people think they've seen shit that they haven't really seen by just convincing them of it.
The king is an ape buggering poof. Wait a minute. If you win enough successes, then the courtier believes they actually did see the king fucking apes.
Yeah,
I had such a fun time in that section.
And then you can do the rumor thing, and then it spreads.
But then you also, if the target is, not the target, the subject of the illusion is a high enough level, you can get into this lovely, like, the king's new or the emperor's new clothes dynamic. That could be a great, even like 2-3 sessions of like, she saw it, but she has to keep it secret, and she's convinced other people saw it too, but it never happened.
Nobody saw King Henry buggering apes. No.
Henry buggering apes, just
and obviously I was putting commentary on the putting in some socio-political commentary on the invulnerabilities, the social invulnerabilities of power in that as well, and that's intentionally tying in with the modern era as well as with that period.
I wanted to ask a question since we're in about powers and groups and effects and so. I wanted to ask everyone since one group the group that got the most expansion in that book, and we talked about this previously, was the High Guild. It got all of its sub guilds mentioned. If any of you remember any of these guilds, do you have a favorite of the sub guilds? It's a banal question, but it's always nice to know.
Oh, I love the Rose Guild. I mean, in the one Sorcerer's Crusade game I've actually played as a player rather than running it for people at conventions. I played a Rose Guild. She was actually a Kassirify, but she was everybody thought she was a Rose Guild facilitator. She was actually a Kassirify assassin.
I
love the Rose Guild.
The Rose Guild, I like the Axe Guild and the Royal Griffin Guild. Those are my favorite. The Rose Guild is nice.
Yeah, I have to be honest. I'm partial to the Black Uncles. Okay. And I really dove into the Black Uncles when I was doing some writing on the High Guild earlier this year, and I realized, like, I had read them in here, but I hadn't gone as deep. And I realized I had basically written a Black Uncle as one of the NPCs in my Sorcerer's Crusade game. I love the patronage. And yeah, I think there's just a lot of like juicy, fun stuff there.
I like the Roman Griffin because I had some knowledge about the financial market and trading of currencies and shit in going around in this period, or at least before, like in the 14th century. I'm quite aware of how that worked and the difference, like cattle, like in Aragon, like the king decided what all the currencies were worth just randomly, while in other parts of the Mediterranean, the market didn't work that way at all. So I like that stuff. I like historical economics. I do not like modern economics one bit. Despite the fact that it's so important, I like when it was traded in gold coins. That's all I'm saying. Same stuff, really, but I'm partial to historic stuff, so that's why I like them. And I like the Axe Guild because they're neat. They're just wandering around, helping protect the interests of the rest of the guilds. And they can retire someday, potentially, if they don't die. It's nice that way.
Yeah. Well, and Phil, you mentioned getting to play Cassirify, which is like in the never to be achieved bucket list of board gamers that I could probably count. Let's talk about the Cassirify a little bit. Where did they come from? Tell us a story about the Cassirify.
Okay, so as in where the concept came from?
Yeah.
I figured that they would. One, I loved the idea of the cowled enforcers, going through the halls of power, and I figured that a group as diverse yet dedicated to order and not even really conformity at that stage, but as the Order of Reason would have enforcers. They'd have enforcers of orthodoxy, and so I kind of ran with a combination of the Spanish Inquisition, the Roman Inquisition, the Star Chamber, and ninjas, and said that this is something that I thought would be I would have a field day to play it, which it was when I did it, and I was like, this is a group that would be a great deal of fun to play. It would throw it would throw an element of tension, going back to that the swashbuckling game that I ran in the '80s. It would throw in an element of tension of not really knowing what your fellow party member or your fellow group member might be doing, what their actual agenda was, and that it would facilitate the kind of roguish. I always play rogues when I'm doing a fantasy game. I whether it's Skyrim or D&D or Age of Conan and whatever, I play rogue characters. I'm not a big fan of rules and so forth, and I like gracefully sneaking around in the shadows, convincing people to do something other than what they're expecting to do, and backstabbing them just because that's me playing my shadow there. So I created a group that would do that, and the name talk about getting your foreign languages from a phrase book. I looked around because I said I want this group to have kind of a name that evokes knives without being the knives. And I was looking through my Greek phrase book, and it's like Cassirify. And I knew someone who knew classical Greek before I knew all my friends in Greece. I wish I could have checked it with them. It actually wasn't wrong, but I checked in with her, and I was like, so does this what's what's the plural and the singular of this? And she's like, it doesn't really actually have one. The word would work either way. It's actually a later than medieval term. The research that I did into it indicates that the term the phrase Cassirify for razor actually originates in the 1700s or 1800s, I think. But I just said, it's I'm making I'm making a creative judgment call here. It's a neat name. It sounds cool. It's evocative. It means razors. Razors are sharper and more subtle than knives. Razors can be used for different things. I like the name. It works.
I actually not to be too falling here, but I think that the Cassirify actually are the best, because every World of Darkness game has had the assassin group.
They're the ones who actually act like it.
Yeah, I know. Well,
and who would actually work, because like for example, like the secret assassins that nobody knows about, like the Naga in Werewolf. There's no reason why they have not been like. I mean, ignoring the fact that in Asia people know that they exist publicly, but for some reason, why in the West we don't know.
yeah, I mean, yeah. Anyway, to talk about the Caserify, because the Naga will just the Naga.
And especially how this expanded on in this book. They're like a loose chain, which is a flexible organizational structure. Will also mean that if a Caserify is caught or found out, it doesn't actually prove anything. It's not like you can use that one Caserify to then unravel the entire conspiracy, which is why I think that was the intention with how they were made.
Well,
Okay.
I was just going to say, the thing I kind of love about the Caserify is there's such a weird mirror of the modern era. Like, you have this kind of open, idealistic order of reason with this nefarious conspiracy enforcing orthodoxy. And then you have this incredibly orthodox, nefarious modern technocracy with like Project Invictus that is kind of taking up the role of the Caserify, but with much better motivations. They complete this lovely mirror image of what the modern group had become. And I was curious how intentional that was.
Oh, it's totally intentional. And I'm looking forward to doing more with Project Invictus in Technocracy Reloaded, because that's another one of those groups where I felt like it should exist. Therefore I can do that. But I like Project Invictus.
I'm just saying, bring in the humanities technocrats.
Yeah.
Because as a representative of the humanities, like classical studies and so on, we're very much left out here in the mage world. Like there's no one fighting for our rights. They're like, hard science and the fancy social sciences of psychoanalysis and stuff. Where's reading? Where are the technocrats who read Plato? We all wonder here.
Celestial Masters.
Yeah, I know. The Celestial Masters.
I love them.
Too bad it didn't show up in more, because I won't be.
Yeah, there was so much more I wanted. The original plan, and this is it gets into a little of the just internal politics or interpersonal politics, really. The original plan that I wanted to do was I wanted to do Sorcerer's Crusade. As I've often said, it's the high fantasy game I always wanted to play. I made it. And then by that point, I was feeling kind of burned out on Modern Mage. What I wanted to do was gradually hand Modern Mage off to Jess Hennig, and I would concentrate on Sorcerer's Crusade if Sorcerer's Crusade took off commercially, which it did. When it was initially one of the concepts that I had, which I'll tell you more about how this wound up amusing in a minute. But one of the concepts that I had with Sorcerer's Crusade was I said I want this to be like D&D done right, and I had actually intended it on some levels to be poaching to be poaching on D&D's territory, because D&D at that point was in decline. TSR was in I think they might have been bought at that point by Wizards of the Coast, but I'd quit playing D&D back in '84 because I hated the system so badly, and I was like, I want this to be like D&D, like I would play D&D. So what I wanted to do, I still had this list of all these books that I wanted to do. There was brief talk when we were doing our board games division, our miniatures games division, which thank you Games Workshop for destroying that dream. But I had I had a board game, Sorcerer's Crusade Battleground thing, all outlined and so forth. What I wanted to do, if if commercially Sorcerer's Crusade had been as successful as we wanted it to be, and as it started out being, was I wanted to just go full time and be the Sorcerer's Crusade developer, hand again Modern Mage off to Jess Hennig, and do what like Rich Dansky was doing as the Dark Ages developer, just make it a whole sub line. Unfortunately, we lost a lot of money in 1998 due to a variety of reasons, some of which were internal and some of which were external. And we ended up having another round of layoffs at the end of that year. And by that point, I was so angry and had so much a lot of tension with management that basically I was like, okay, I'm out. And Steve was like, yes, you are. So because Ken Cliff, the head of editing and developing, did not want to just drop Mage on its head. Jess had just been with the company for a few months and was like, um, what I did was Ken Ken worked out, negotiated something where I would continue finishing up the books that I had started with Mage the Ascension, and then continue doing Sorcerer's Crusade out of house. But I would transition the development with Jess Hennig, and Jess and I are friends, so that was a smooth development process for several of the books there. And unfortunately, because of hard feelings, uh, the transition was not as smooth as maybe Ken, Jess, and I would have liked it to have been in terms of what other people wanted. And I just got very angry with that situation and started stepping further and further away. Meanwhile, Mike Tinney, was part of the hard feelings involved Sorcerer's Crusade being canceled, along with Wraith and Changeling, because
And then
the sales were
got
just
Demon the Fallen and Hunter the Reckoning out of this.
yeah.
The trade-off.
Yeah. Part of something else that explains that particular period of White Wolf history is that the industry was having a lot of problems commercially. There had been the implosion of the collectible trading card market, or the collectible card game market, which had imploded in '96 and '97 and took several companies and distributors and a lot of stores with it. There had been the fiasco where Marvel Comics had been bought by a Wall Street raider who tried to run it like the cosmetics company that he had run before. And between those two factors, about a third of the comic and gaming stores in America, possibly even North America, I don't know what the situation was in Canada, but I know it was in the United States, went under in a period of less than a year. That had a cascading effect which damaged every gaming company in the industry, including us. Plus, we were running into creative fatigue. We were releasing 10 books per line per year, and doing it for a year or two with 3 lines is very different than doing it for 6 years with 8 lines. And we were burning through our creative staff, we were burning through our in-house staff, we were burning through our freelancers, and we were burning through the audience and shelf space on the in the market. And yet we still needed to constantly get product out there, because otherwise sales would stagnate, and we literally could not have kept the lights on if that had happened. So the emphasis shifted during that period to projects that were probably going to sell X number of copies, because that was survival. We needed to do that or we would go out of business. And so a lot of the kind of over the top superhero type stuff, the power creep, where dinosaurs and shit like that starts really coming in that period, because it was at that point sales and marketing's job was to keep the company in business. So sales and marketing was saying, this book needs to sell this many copies, so make it like this. That was not a situation I wanted to deal with. So
You
I
always
was
been much more
pushing back against that. Um,
You always
but
been Marcus in your heart.
Well, and the thing is, it's really easy, and a lot of people look at that period and go, "Oh, well, sales and marketing took over the creativity of White Wolf." We're talking about keeping the lights on and keeping people employed.
Yeah, and I mean that's important.
Yeah,
That matters.
People have no idea, unless they've actually done it, how expensive something a company like White Wolf is. The costs of running it on an even weekly basis, much less a yearly basis, are enormous.
Well,
And
yeah, and I mean,
so we had to sell product, and we had to sell a certain amount of product, because we were losing, we were losing money badly because of these. Again, some of the mistakes were in house, but the majority of them were external. And they had, that's what their job was to keep us in business. So it's really not fair to say sales and marketing were, sales and marketing bad, creative people good. Some of those creative experiments that we did, like Book of Nods, sold very well. Then there were ones like Face of Death, which didn't.
What? I have never heard about this book.
You don't want to.
Oh, I mean, get a copy of Wraith 20th. It's in the front of the book. Like they put Face of Death in the front of the book instead of a newly written fiction piece. There it is.
Know that. I haven't seen Wraith 20, so I didn't know that. Oh, that's funny. It looks nice.
It's beautiful. I mean, it's completely gorgeous. And they redid the typesetting, so it's cleaner. I actually kind of like that it's there. It's a nice it's kind of like the first edition Mage Storyteller's screen art that you had to put in the deluxe. It kind of has the same place in my heart as that.
I had to do a shout out to that. That was just it's so bad, but it's so charmingly awful. I had to have that in there.
Very well executed bit of pulp chaos. Like props to the artist, but it's a wreck.
And that's one of those other things that goes to show just how much Mage had changed between what Stewart had initially envisioned it to be and what actually came out even as the first edition, much less in the later books. Because it was cyberpunk Doctor Strange.
I don't know how that would have integrated with vampire and werewolf.
It didn't. That's why it got changed. That was one of the things, one of the many notes that Rob Hatch, when he led the no, actually we need to throw this out and do it over again at the last minute, was he's like, this doesn't fit at all. Yeah. This is neat. It's fun. I mean, Rob was also the one who co-created Aberrant and Exalted. And Rob's feeling was, it would be awesome to have a White Wolf over the top 4-color superhero thing, but but Mage shouldn't be it.
Yeah.
So in terms of Sorcerer's Crusade and all of that, one of the things that was done at the upper management levels was to start slashing lines because we had too many of them. We did. We just didn't have the resources. So he cut the ones that were selling least. Sorcerer's Crusade was less than a year old at that point. I mean, God, I think it was less than 6 months old at that point. And so that was on the chopping block along with Werewolf the Wild West, Changeling, Wraith. Street Fighter had been canceled before that. I think Aeon got canceled also during that thing. And what Mike Tinney did was Mike said, "Hey, what if I do an imprint?" Laying the groundwork really for Onyx Path here, but he said, "What if I do an imprint? I will own this," meaning I being Mike Tinney. Mike Tinney will own the company and he put up the money to do it, but he said, and I can license these canceled properties from White Wolf and pay White Wolf a licensor fee, and he was paying in royalties. And Steve was like, "Yeah, sure, go do that." So Mike came to me and said, "You want to keep doing Sorcerer's Crusade?" I was like, "Yes." So I did Swashbuckler's Handbook, Infernalism, and Witches and Pagans were done as art house. That was Mike's imprint, art house. They were done as art house projects, not as White Wolf projects. They were licensed under White Wolf, but it was art house that was producing them. A really good thing about this was he paid me royalties, which
nice.
On Infernalism was a fairly considerable amount, more than I made off any Mage book before that. Grant, I didn't make royalties, and I didn't get paid freelance for Mage stuff anyway. That was considered part of my salary, but in any case, I had wanted and was planning to continue to do this. However, I got very angry with the way that Jess Hennig was treated by sales, marketing, and management with regards to the Mage Revised situation. We've talked about that before, and I just said, "Fuck it." Threw up my hand, said, "I'm done. I can't do this anymore." Handed Order of Reason and Witches and Pagans off to Rochelle to finish. And in one of the things that I really wish I hadn't done, canceled my contract for the revised edition of the Toreador Toreador clan book, which I was writing for Justin. And I really, 2020 hindsight, one, I wish I hadn't, just gotten angry and stormed away. You could see that anger come through in Infernalism and in reignofevil.com, which I wrote for Aberrant. I 2020 hindsight, it shows how burnt out and how frustrated I felt at that time, and I wish I'd handled things a little bit differently. But at the same time, I also needed to make a break because my life had been consumed by White Wolf for, at that point, 8 years, and I needed to work on my own stuff.
Like Deliria, which we talk about in the Symposium podcast, which is right here on Podcast Beam. As Phil will attest, I am the master of coming with not elegant plugs.
Which I appreciate, because subtlety doesn't sell books.
No, subtlety doesn't sell much of anything.
Doesn't sell much of anything. Well, I was told, and I've taken this lesson to mind. Like I was watching a Q&A video by a YouTuber called Jesse Cox, who started up in 2009, 2010ish, doing gaming videos, and he was like, "How do you get big on YouTube?" And his was like, market promoted the market like a shameless whore. Just go out everywhere, tell people about it all the time, post it see this video, it's great. That's my mindset about everything. So when I know in the developers, I will go around, I will message everyone that I know who would even be remotely interested in this. I will message. I'm getting called again. Give me a second. Very professional here. I will call everyone. Message everyone and be like, "You have to buy this thing. You have to buy this thing." I've done that for Power Chords. I've done that for Part-Time Gods. And this is where we do the elegant segues that I was talking about earlier. There's another one in this room who also has projects. Not me, because I don't do anything. But Victor, you have a thing, and you've mentioned it before. Talk about that thing, regale it.
Yeah, so that thing is I've moved to calling it a Chronicle Jumpstart for Modern Mage, that's going to be coming out on the Storyteller's Vault. It's called A Phoenix Rising. I took one of the plot hooks from M20, and I played around with this 2 Gen Cons ago in a con game I ran. I took the plot hook about, the traditions are back and organized and they have a base of power, but they have not elected a council. And maybe they won't. Maybe they will. What's going on? We don't know, but things seem okay right now. And maybe that's good enough. And I went, okay, so what would actually drive the election of a new council? And so I wanted to kind of play around with a couple things in this book, and it's almost done. I've done the majority of the layout. I'm waiting on 3 art pieces. I've approved a sketch on one, a concept on another, and then there's one left that the artist has to do. They're for the character profiles. I know that there's always been this kind of view that you can't do an adventure for Mage. It doesn't work. Phil, I've seen you talk about it on groups online, and I went, okay, I work in
challenge accepted.
Yeah, well, I work in product development, and so we're constantly ripping apart, customer requirements. And I went, okay, so what are the actual requirements for a usable Mage module? Don't try to write an adventure like anybody else ever has. What works for Mage? and what doesn't work for mage? Why does it fail? And I thought about, what do I do when I start a chronicle? What are the pieces I need to create that aren't really available in the line? And I tried to build something that was a collection of those bits and pieces, a concept, a challenge, a thing that's happening. I really deeply steeped this story in the Ascension War. The Council's coming back, and there's a reason for it, and the technocracy has opinions. But I also did it. I also wanted to kind of balance that back and forth between your mages. You change the world. You push at the pivot of reality, but also street level. Like, no, this isn't going to be ridiculous high flying. So the characters are basic starting book characters, and their backgrounds are basic starting book backgrounds, but they happen to live in this city where the traditions have decided to come and do this thing. It's set in Las Vegas, and it's weirdly a technocratic stronghold. And why the hell is that happening? And that's one of the big question marks in the setting. And then I wrote up like 5 different versions of the truth. There are 5 different what's actually going on. Like, here are the first several pages. You can just hand these to your players and they can read them. This is the common knowledge, what any PC would know. But then there's a chapter and a section that is, for the storyteller, question mark, what's really going on? I introduced a couple ideas. I wanted the technocracy to be very approachable and relatable. I treat them as perfectly equal. There are 3 tradition mage PC templates, 3 disparate mage PC templates, 3 technocrat PC templates. And all of the scenarios say, here's what makes the most sense for mixing and matching these characters given this, and how their biases would interact, and the truth that you can have in the background that makes it work. It's not an adventure. You could run this thing 8 times, and it would, none of those 8 times would bear any difference. And it's meant to be a starting off point for a chronicle, but it gives you all those pieces. It gives you a couple NPCs. It gives you PC templates you could hand to someone who's starting mage and is overwhelmed by M20, because I see that post at least once every other month. Yeah, and it's rooted in the canon. I see a lot of players that just kind of get overwhelmed by the mage canon and don't know what to do with it. And it's rooted in the politics, but all the characters are characters. They're people. And like, who is the human that the Etherites are really a representation of? That character is there.
I'm just saying, if this works out and you do another one of these in the future, can there be a space butterfly worshiping mage?
We'll see. I'm not gonna lie. I have several other storyteller vault.
I will heavily lobby for this. I will lobby for it. I mean, I will poke you on your head in Facebook chat and be like, "Good." I will just do that. Anyway, so you're trying to, so you're basically giving the newbies wet dream is what you're coming with here. You're doing a public service with this, and like all public services, it should be duly compensated for. So when this comes out in Storytellers Vault, people should buy it and pay money for it. And then
that's my hope. I hope that they do this in large part because I'm paying an editor a cut of the profits, and I'm paying the artist a cut of the profits. So there are.
So
yeah, I was just about to ask you about that one. That's my question.
Yeah, so most of the art is from the art packs that White Wolf provides from the previous line that you can just pull stuff from. But I had these 9 PC templates, and I really wanted to, like, PC templates without art is weird. So I have a friend, he's not a professional artist, but he does good digital work. It's solid. And so I asked him if he'd be willing to do this. And I opened with, I absolutely cannot pay you what this work is worth, but I can give you a cut of whatever this sells for. And, he was open to the idea. He thought it was super exciting. I love what he's done. I love the character pieces. I think they're fantastic. I'll just throw this warning out there to prevent any purchases by anyone who might be upset about this. There are no straight white males in the book. Not one anywhere. One NPC. There's one NPC. Good for him. No, I take it back. He's not white. No, there are none anywhere in the book.
but Victor, how is this going to be marketable for people? That you have to have a white guy in there.
You know, it's funny. It was an accident. I was intentionally doing, a very broad array of different backgrounds, and there are white characters. And when I stopped, I made all of the white characters women. Well, and I did not do it on purpose, but I looked at it when I was done, and I went, yeah, I'm not changing it.
Okay. You say you didn't do it on purpose, but really it was chemtrails making you pull through the SJW.
Yeah, of course.
And I mean, it's been on to you for quite some time. I'm just saying, you're being exposed as viewer. That's why, I mean, we're truth tellers here on this podcast. We expose SJW trolls like you all the time. That's why we tricked you on here for 2 episodes. We could expose you for having an agenda. Because
I had a similar.
I'm sorry. Oh, I can't keep that up.
No, that's yeah. But anyway, Phil.
I had a similar reaction reading through the first layout proof of Gods and Monsters, which we had always intended to be a very diverse book, but I'm reading through the characters going, boy, there's a lot of queer characters in this. And we didn't set out going, there will be this many queer characters. It's just that's the way the entries and the way the characters wanted to be. But I was reading through it going, wow, okay, that character, that wow.
That's really just a lovely experience every time that shows up, though, in my opinion. Like I've been reading a lot, like in recent years, because we've gotten better about diversification and having proper representation in books and stuff. I've just been reading books and just realized, oh, there's like one white guy in this book, or there's no white guys. I'm like, oh, great, and there's so many queer people. Like I was reading this book series that's predominantly meant for young kids and young teens and stuff. I'm like, oh. There's a gender fluid character in this book, and it becomes the main love interest of the main character. You don't see that often. Awesome. Woo.
Yeah.
That was why I enjoyed Travelers too. I'm like, there's so many tough white guys.
Oh, the racists hate that show. The bigots hate Travelers, which is awesome.
Oh, I didn't you post like someone had written this like really angry racist rant?
Ben did. So for folks who are not familiar, Travelers is an urban fantasy web series that I've worked on with Zombie Orpheus Productions, Zombie Orpheus Entertainment. I'm sorry, that is run by Ben Dobbins, and the initial episodes of it appeared 2 months ago, I guess November. Went public in November, and they have been highly praised by most people and really, really hated by bigots, which just makes us all kind of
I had a similar experience with Star Wars, the new Star Wars movies, and I know I'm getting crucified now because the new Star Wars is bad. I really enjoyed watching them, and I was just like, I didn't realize it before after a movie. I'm like, there weren't really that many white men in this movie, weren't it? And a lot of the toxic masculinity bullshit was made fun of or pointed out why it's bad.
Dark topic.
I loved The Last Jedi. And I will just point out the only people I ever see really complain about The Last Jedi movie are either really like the nerd complaints, like, oh, how could Holdo have flown the ship like that into a bunch of people? That doesn't make sense. Or it's libertarian, like right-leaning libertarians or right-wing people. That's the only people I've ever really seen beside the book. And they hate the movie so much that they rant about it for months after.
You see people going, oh, that logic, that plot hole there, that wouldn't have happened. I'm like, so have you ever watched a Star Wars movie before?
Oh, right. Yeah. I mean, let's talk about the original Star Wars plot.
The acting was not up to standard. I'm like, have you seen the prequels? Have you seen the original Star Wars? The acting is horrible.
Acting, I've taken acting classes and stuff. I've been an actor, but not that much as you have, Phil. But so that gives me some credence when it comes to recognizing some acting here. I'm just saying, I remember seeing Luke in episode 4.
Oh God.
Yeah. I remember that.
She's power stations with power converters. Everybody who was involved in the original, all the actors who were involved in the original Star Wars were embarrassed. They considered it to be career suicide until the movie became a success.
Yeah.
Alec Guinness still considered it to be
distinguished old actors and young actors who couldn't get anything better done. Right.
Yeah, I mean, Peter Cushing was a class act because he's been in more shitty movies than anybody other than maybe Christopher Lee. So he was just like, oh, whatever, it's a paycheck. But James Earl Jones did not want to be credited as Darth Vader. Sir Alec Guinness considered the movie to be an embarrassment.
Alec Guinness hated Star Wars, and he ranted about how much he hated it for years after that.
It wound up being, a career milestone. I think one of the great ironies being there that James Earl Jones, because he was a serious actor, did not want to be credited as the voice of Darth Vader until, the movie became a success, at which point he did. But then later goes on to be Thulsa Doom in that wretched Conan movie. He was actually, credited starring James Earl Jones. Like, oh, dude. But the thing of it is, having been involved in the creative process of movies as well, you don't know. When you're looking at the script or you're in front of the cameras or whatever, you have no idea whether or not, even if you're the director, you have no idea whether or not this movie is going to be any good or not. And from all the things that have come out from the original Star Wars since then, George Lucas himself was convinced that it was going to be a complete failure, and that it was Kathleen Kennedy and Marsha Lucas saving the film in the editing room, and John Williams saving it with one of the greatest scores ever composed. But that when the pieces were there, when they were looking at the rushes before the special effects had been added, before the film had been edited, before it had been scored, they were like, "Oh my God, this is horrible." You don't know. And on a lot of levels, it's true also with books, although I've done this enough to have a better idea. My instincts and my critical eye are experienced enough to know when a book's not working and to work on it until it is. It's one of the things that happened with, for instance, Gods and Monsters. We had an original concept and started working on it, and James and Hiromi and Isabella and I were writing stuff, and I was going, this isn't working yet, and they're like, yeah, it's not working yet. And it really, we took the pieces in January of 2017. Yeah, the beginning of January rather, 2017, and we all sat down at the theater where Isabella worked, and we had a meeting. I said, "Okay, this is not working. How can we make it work?" And so we went back. We all rewrote the stuff that we were writing, and I refocused based on the conversations we'd had. I refocused the theme of the book to make it something that was more than just a collection of NPCs, that had a thematic content to it, and we were working with that and reshaping it into something that was starting to look like, yes, this is what we want. Right around the time that Coyote and Raven died, and I went into kind of creative of coma there for a few weeks, and then started writing the book around in January and February. Started writing the book around the pieces. That's one of the few times in recent memory that I haven't been sure whether or not a project is working or not. But there was definitely this feeling of, oh shit, we don't know whether this is going to be good or a complete disaster. And they had that same feeling in Star Wars with the original Star Wars with I think part of the problem, since we're dealing with the creative process, a big part of the problem with the prequel trilogy is that George Lucas was so convinced at that point that he knew what he was doing that he didn't. And I think, and it's not just him. Everybody around him in the original Star Wars, of course, you had Harrison Ford and Carrie Fisher rewriting their lines or making up new ones on set. You even had that on the later two Star Wars films. By the time he got to shooting The Phantom Menace, though, nobody knew what the script said because Lucas was so paranoid about being leaked on the net that nobody saw a complete script. I think he was also rewriting it at the time. But he was convinced that he knew what it was, that it was going to be great, and everybody around him was convinced it was going to be great also. Like you had Samuel Jackson, who is not exactly, and Liam Neeson, who are not exactly
no-name schmucks.
yeah, if they think something's wrong, they'll tell you. But they were just like, oh, but it's George Lucas and he's a genius, so he knows what he's doing. And then it came out. It was horrible.
He's a good idea.
Yeah.
He's a good idea man, but he needs to have people around. He needs a brain trust.
He needs a brain trust.
Well,
he's not really good at writing dialogue. I think that's
God, no.
No.
Oh God, no.
No.
He's not good at writing, period.
But here's the thing. I think that like the prequels actually have a lot more good ideas than the original movies. Like the entire political message, for example.
Yeah.
Like the entire I think it actually is the most important political commentary, or it's one of the most political commentaries in the last 20 years or so.
But it's so poorly executed, which is the problem.
It's horrifically executed. Like the only good, really, the only good scene really is when he's holding when Palpatine is doing the Jedi will be hunted down and eliminated speech, and it's like, this is how liberty dies. That's the only good scene. But really, if you look at it, it's really a story about how a liberal democracy, through corruption of its democratic processes and general corruption, can just be turned into a dictatorship. And accept it. And it's brilliant. It's a brilliant commentary. It's just so badly executed that you have to sit down and think 5 years after you've seen the movie and be like, Oh,
but we don't want to have social justice agendas in our Star Wars movies. They should just be pure entertainment.
Yeah, because there's no politics in art, okay? And here's the thing: it's social. Don't you know there's a big conspiracy? There's a social-political, social-cultural conspiracy to remove and marginalize white men by having women be in nerd movies. And the critics of those movies are the silliest critics sometimes. The acting is bad. I mean, the acting is excellent, but
the acting is amazing compared to the acting in the other six.
It's not 12 Years a Slave, but I think the acting is good in those movies, and it's much better than any of the older Star Wars movies. But Rey, she's so powerful. How does she use her force like that? I read Star Wars EU, and this is the same people. EU, it's so bad it's gone, and I'm part of those people to an extent, but we're talking about the same setting where we have recorded the guy started using the force in the womb to move furniture around and stuff. We can't really be it's just because the wombs are suddenly using the force. You can't just be it's unrealistic. She wasn't trained to be a Jedi. I'm because Star Wars realism and consistency, those are things that I associate with that brand.
So about the 8-year-old slave boy who built C-3PO in the desert out of spare parts.
Yeah. 6 million languages.
Yep. Yeah. That's one of the. This is to go back to what we were talking about with brain trusts. This is one of the reasons I have brain trusts.
Yeah, so you don't become George Lucas.
Yeah, I when I was teaching at the Art Institute, I would show you use the prequels and show part of the second film as examples of do not disappear up your own ass.
It's a sand sin, isn't it?
Yeah, it's don't disappear. I said always check your ego. Do not disappear up your own ass, and that's one of the reasons I have brain trust. I've got a really good critical eye for my work, but I also realize that my critical eye still misses stuff, and I never do, and I hope I never will get to the position where I'm just going, oh well, I know what's best for this. Fuck everybody else. I definitely have strong opinions about my work, but I'm always. I wrote about this with somebody on somebody's wall earlier today, because he was commenting on how um, on how looking at the way that old white wolf people, comment and like or dislike or whatever each other's comments online, he couldn't understand how we ever got along with each other well enough to work. And I'm like, because you used to be able to have an argument with somebody in the office and then apologize and then go out for a beer and work together. Before disagreements became 24/7 international performative cruelty theater, you could actually have a disagreement with somebody
Oh,
and still work with them. And I said that my favorite mage collaborator, or at least my favorite writing mage collaborator, was Kathy Ryan. We argued all the time.
well, it depends on what you argue about, in my opinion. Like, there's certain people I don't think you should like. Oh, I can argue with them and then collaborate with them later. Like, if they're like, we should send gay conversion camps, they're great.
Yeah, we didn't have arguments like that, obviously. We had disagreements. We had philosophical disagreements. We had theological disagreements. We had some political disagreements, but we always respected each other, and we still do. We always liked each other, and we still do. And we were always, both of us, willing to go, you're right. I didn't agree with you, but our debates, our arguments would bring would often, sometimes they'd bring the other person around, sometimes they wouldn't, but they were a vital part of the creative process. And this idea that everybody has to either agree completely or hate each other and burn each other's careers to the ground is not only ridiculous from an interpersonal standpoint, it leads to bad art. You have to be able to have disagreements with people, or to point out, hey, this thing isn't working. More importantly, you have to be able to point out to people who are working on something, who are maybe heading it, hey, this is not working. Otherwise, you get crap like the Star Wars, like the prequel trilogy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it kind of struck me. It was a couple months ago. It would have been. Let's see. I was at my company's conference. It was in November. The end of the conference, I sat down, and my whole team is very, very liberal, with two exceptions. There are two conservatives on my team. One of them is a bit of a libertarian firebrand, and one of them is pretty guarded. She doesn't want to she doesn't want politics to be a thing in the office, which I respect. But she, I, and two other people did end up having a political debate at the end of our conference. We were just sitting in the lobby killing time because we weren't ready to fly back home yet. But it was a reasonable conversation. Like, we disagreed, and I disagree with almost all of her points about how government should work. It was all like, I don't want to say libertarian. That invokes very specific things. But this was all very much like, I think XYZ leads to a good outcome in the way government is structured. Like, that's the type of conservatism we were discussing. And it was a reasonable disagreeing conversation. She very clearly disagreed with my points of view. I was tempering my socialist views a little bit, but still like framing it in the, I want you to at least be able to see where I'm coming from. Like, those conversations are hard, but they're how you get and understand things and people. And I realized at the end of that, and I posted on Facebook about it, like, it had been a couple years since I'd had one of those conversations, like really meaty ones. And I used to have them all the time. And I'm like, this isn't okay. This isn't good.
I feel you're attacking me a bit here, Victor, because we have had several disagreements. Like Savage, for example.
Oh, not like this. You and I have had like one-off topic disagreements, and then we get into the thing we totally agree on. No, this was like an engaged conversation with someone else who philosophically is working on a different axis than I am. But it was a constructive conversation. Like, I haven't had one of those conversations in a long time.
I mean, I've gotten through, as I've had, like, here is giving a bit of backstory about myself. I'm an autistic person, okay, and I live in Norway, and currently we have a conservative government. Every year they make my life worse in measurable ways. So the older I get now, the angrier and more red I become.
I would wonder what that's like now.
I'm at the cusp of joining the Red Party, which is the closest you get to the Marxist Party. who have been really popular of late. Like they've grown a lot of popularity. Like they've gotten like quadrupled the amount of membership in like 2 or 3 years. So that's something. But anyway, like yeah. So I'm just like I'm close to just going completely off the red scale. And I know that to Americans that might be scary. I mean, your left is mostly conservatives, but it can be done. It can be done.
Every time I hear some American conservative talk about somebody being far left, I'm like, you have no idea what far left actually looks like.
Yeah, I mean, you know, Cortez's recent proposal about 70% taxes over 10 million in income, and it's like, yeah, we did that in America.
We did that.
Like, we've been there. It worked. It worked well. Like, this isn't a radical untested thing.
It wasn't that wanted a golden age that you people want to go back to.
Oh, that's the whole of all the America. Oh, we want to make America great again, like it was in the 50s. First of all, it wasn't that great for anybody who wasn't a white straight man conformist. But more importantly, yeah, that's the time that we had the highest taxes in American history, and we had a war traumatized populace who was disguising their PTSD with drugs and alcohol. And we had domestic violence, and we were the only major industrial power that had not been bombed flat and had most of our workforce killed.
Yeah, but we didn't talk about any of those things, and so privileged individuals didn't have to be uncomfortable about it.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, that's really something people who are like, oh, there's so much agendas and SJW and stuff. It's like all of the stuff we see now, like with cops shooting black people like it's opening hunting season on deer, and you know, gay people getting harassed and women getting attacked at McDonald's just because, you know, she didn't answer a question or whatever quickly enough, and she just get grabbed by random people like we just saw the other day. I mean, that thing, you know, should be going on constantly. Privileged people now notice it because they're forced to. And I am a privileged person to an extent, and I'm forced to notice these things. So rather than sticking my head in the sand and being like, "Oh, you're being so political," I you know, I'm just like, okay, I'm just going to get more angry about this shit now.
This is one of the reasons why I wish technical difficulties hadn't taken Rochelle out of the conversation.
Oh, yeah.
Because, man, none of us has any idea what she goes through.
No.
You know, as I said, I pointed out I was autistic and the government makes my life worse, but it is in such small ways compared to like what a person from a visible minority group goes through on a daily basis in America. Like I'm sitting here in Norway being like, oh, I have to call to get the meeting now, like rather than just going in. Oh, that's the shit that happens to me.
It's a slightly different scale.
We're talking about people getting assaulted by police and all sorts of shit that I have no idea how to even comprehend how to deal with. So yeah,
or just working at McDonald's apparently. That
most dangerous job.
Somebody did and I don't know because I don't know what their sources were. I haven't had the opportunity to check it, but somebody did a rundown of a demographic rundown of the number of the most dangerous jobs in the United States in terms of homicides, in terms of people being killed on the job. Retail workers were number 2 after police officers,
and that's because they separate cashiers from that specific category. So like retail people and cashiers. I'm like, but those are the same.
Yeah, right. Retail. They had retail workers, cashier, and fast food workers were 3 different categories, and all of them were on the top 10 list of most fatality. Again, it's not accident fatality. It's not like, industrial workers. We're talking about people who are murdered on the job. Number 2,
people, those people, ice crab fishers or whatever in the North Sea or whatever.
Yeah, and that's and there was definitely a racial component and a gender component involved in that customer assaulting that woman at.
Yeah.
But the idea that the customer is always right, and damn to every hell that exists, the guy who came up with that term, that phrase.
That guy.
But the idea that the customer is always right and can do whatever the hell they want, yeah, I've been on the receiving end of that. Nobody ever grabbed me. I'm a fairly substantial, fairly physically substantial, imposing white guy.
And you have,
and I would clock them if they did that. But
Yeah.
I have definitely, I've been fired because from one job because my boss left early and left a bunch of stuff undone, and because when people, it was a 1-hour photo gig, and when people came to get their photos and the stuff wasn't done, they were screaming at me. One of them was screaming at me across the counter. I said, "Lady, I can't do anything for you. I can't do it." She's like, "Why is this not done? You stole my money." I'm like, "I haven't paid you, or you haven't paid for it yet because it's not done." And I said, she's like, "You have to do it right now." I'm like, "I can't do it right now. The machine is shut down." She's like, "Why are you mouthing off to me?" I'm like, "I can't do anything about it." And she reported me to my manager, who was the reason I was getting yelled at in the first place, and he fired me. And that
Wow.
sort of behavior goes on all the time in retail, because
yeah, I was just gonna say, I can't help but wonder if there's like some funky shame thing going on there. Like, he knew he screwed up.
Oh, totally.
But he couldn't acknowledge that, and so firing you made the whole thing go away for him.
Oh, he admitted that to me in as many words. His
oh my God.
Well, the thing is he was overruled because she didn't go to him and complain. She went to the district manager. And he's like, "I'm sorry, I have no choice. I've been ordered to fire you. I know I screwed up. I can't not, but I've been ordered to fire you." This is one of many reasons I loathe corporate America.
Corporations are great. They are people, in fact. Honestly, sorry. Yeah, I mean, but privileged people now notice it, and it's uncomfortable. And pasty white guys on the internet are sitting around in their basements and being like, "Oh, we suffer too."
Yeah. Well, they're scared. They're scared because the world doesn't look like, because the world both around them and the world on their screens and in their books doesn't look like them, and that scares them.
Do you remember? I think I shared this video with you, where there was this guy who was like looking at like reactions to like Star Wars, and there was this guy like this this guy was commenting on different alt-right figures commenting on this, and was like, alt-right guy was like, "Star Wars has always traditionally been loved most by white men." And then it was like it got into comics, and and now girls are like getting into comics, and the guy was like, "I have to share my comics with girls." Which sums up a lot of this. They're like, "Oh, but it's always belonged to us whites. That's nerd culture. Belongs to us. It's ours."
Just like, I think it was 2 days ago, I was in a debate with somebody about that, and he was going, well, you've got to realize that comic books were originally started by businessmen, so it was always just about making money. There was no agenda in there. And I said, "Yeah, Jewish businessmen at the beginning of the Holocaust." And he's like, "You're right." I'm like, "Shall we start chapter and versing and I illustrated that with a picture of Captain America punching Hitler, and I'm like, do I have to start chapter and versing all the stuff? I started talking about EC comics and so forth, and he's like, no, you're right. It's he said, "I concede."
Yeah, I mean,
it's a rare thing on an internet argument.
That's true. That is a very rare thing in an internet argument.
Speaking of internet arguments, before I will regale you about my thing that I want to talk about after the auction. Speaking of internet arguments, we are into primary season again. Because the first debate in June, or I think either July or June, means that the primaries are starting now, significantly earlier than last time.
So yeah, they are.
We get basically 2 years of primaries. Aren't we excited, everyone?
You are making a big deal out of this because you have seen me groan about this on Facebook. You are doing that on purpose.
I confirm nor deny this, but I've seen both of you groan about this on Facebook. Here's the thing. I feed off of these discussions. I'm never more alive than during primary season. Oh God, I was the only one who loved 2016. I had the best time that year. That's also because I don't live in America, so when Trump was I was allowed to find that funny because I didn't need to care. But I told everyone I knew who lived in America after Trump was elected. I was like, I told you so, because I had gone for weeks and gotten shit on because I was like, this could go either way. I'm not calling it for anyone. I didn't even do that on election day. Not say I predicted Trump would win. I was just not sure who would win. And people were like, I didn't obviously have this. So the first thing I did after that was like, I told you so. And the second thing I did was move, run, abort.
Yeah. No. I mean, here's the thing. I saw a lot of really intense activists when that conversation started basically scream at the top of their lungs, and they've been screaming all year, but scream at the top of their lungs, screw you, we've been fucking dealing with this our entire lives. You suck it up and fix it here. And I totally agree with that perspective.
Oh, yeah. I'm just saying selfishly, run away. Really, you should be fighting now is the real fight. It's the fight for survival here and shit. But anyway, we're back in primary season, and we're already getting into candidates, and we're already getting CNN. CNN is already pushing bullshit, and we're seeing people bring let's go get Bernie back, let's get a Jedi, let's get Tulsi, and we're seeing CNN say Amy Klobuchar is definitely having this, or Kamala Harris and Cory Booker, and I'm like, oh, this is great. And Biden is getting out of his grave, just crawling out for
Biden's gonna run. Biden has to. Biden has to run.
Biden's going to try and run again, but he's like Clinton. He gets less popular the longer he campaigns. Like, we've tried this before. He's getting out for a third try. I think it's a short try anyway. And we are ready for a bloodbath here, and it's going to be basic entertainment for me and horrible for everyone else who actually have stakes in this.
The thing that people keep forgetting about American presidential politics, particularly from the Democratic side, is nobody saw Jimmy Carter coming, nobody saw Ronald Reagan coming, nobody saw Bill Clinton coming, and nobody saw Barack Obama coming.
No, nobody saw Bernie coming. He didn't win, but he did way better than anyone thought.
Yeah, he there's a lot of evidence indicating that. He probably still would maybe have lost, but there was a lot to the whole DNC screwing over thing that ruined his chances here. But even so, he got like 45% of the votes, and he started out being nobody. He had no name recognition. He was a complete fucking. He was a random guy from Vermont with weird hair and had culture.
He'd been not random. He'd been in Congress forever. But nobody. But he was not a household name.
Yeah,
no.
And he became a household name in less than 6 months.
Yeah.
And nobody thought. Nobody thought seriously at the beginning of the primaries that Donald Trump had a chance. Donald Trump didn't think he had a chance. He basically admitted he was doing it, to see if he could, and then talk about be careful what you wish for, you might get
well it. He was planning to start a network, a media network, as soon as the election was over. He was laying the groundwork before the election, and then he was elected, and that all magically went away. He assumed he was going to lose right up to the final moment.
Technically he did, but
yeah.
We sold the democracy then, but you are not a democracy. It doesn't matter.
Right.
But what I was going to say is that I actually was very much against the whole not taking Trump seriously as a candidate thing. We all knew that he was doing it just because publicity and shit. But after, not even I think it was at the first debate where I was turning, and I was like, we have to take this seriously now, because he just went in there, and by being a complete fucking idiot, he still managed to kick every Republican's ass at the first debate.
Yeah.
That was for one really depressing to see that nobody in the Republican Party has actually any kind of wit at all.
Yeah.
But after that, I was like, we have to take him seriously. And I've been putting this narrative for a long time, because every time we say he couldn't do something, he went on and did it. He's not going to actually run for president. People said
James Sobrano, to turn this back to Mage, for anybody who's still listening.
for the five listeners we still have, yeah, back to nature was probably this wise.
But yeah, James Zambrano, who is a Chiricahua activist who was at Standing Rock and who has also worked on several Mage books, including Gods and Monsters, and is a longtime Mage fan and very good friend of mine. He was commenting from pretty much the beginning that he's like, Trump's going to win, and people are like, no, he's too over the top. And James is like, so speaking as somebody from a from the population that everybody hates, yeah, no, he's gonna do. He's like, Trump is embodying the kind of bigotry that I and my people see all the time. He's going to win because
Yeah.
he's not an aberration for America. He is an embodiment of a certain element of America.
He's the embodiment of how the world perceives you. That's what he is.
He's an embodiment of how America really is on a lot of levels.
Yeah,
That's not a
he really
compliment
is.
to him
No,
or
it's
to us.
I mean, not to insult Americans despite the fact that I do this regularly. He's how, at least Europe, that's how we view you. Like, Trump is pretty
Not
much
wrong.
Yeah, that's how we view you as a people. Like my mother, I've told people about this before, but my mother is a politician here in Norway, right? She's a social democrat, and she's very active. And we have had these weird moments where we have either talked about the United States or seen things in the United States that you people just present as normal, and we just collectively wince. Like, I was watching this program, like this random documentary about eclipses or something, and people who go to look at them. And there was this random school class from school who was like, and the teacher was like, "Oh, yeah, 99% of the students here are from this lower socioeconomic bracket," and we both winced because that's just so casually mentioned as just a thing. It's just tremendous to us. And I told her about how teachers have to buy, fire extinguishers for their own classrooms.
And I mean, go ahead.
And earn minimum wage and shit. I told her just a little bit about how workers in America are treated, and she was like, "They're slaves."
Yep.
That's how we view them, because you go along with it.
An important lens that I think not nearly enough people use when looking at the Americas, and I'm not just talking about the United States. It's true of all of the American countries. Is the Americas were formed as a commercial enterprise and never really recovered beyond that.
No.
Canada is probably the least, and in part because it's still a province of a constitutional monarchy, so it's a little bit better. But all of the American countries are business propositions, and the first and foremost political concern with all of them is profit.
Yeah.
So anyway, before we get too political for too long, I'm just saying, later when we have got more of the candidates in, I'm just saying we're going to have to do a primary episode. I think we should do it after each day too.
Oh, jeez.
With me.
Sure, why not? I'll do that. I'll channel the rage that I know I will be swallowing at that point.
Channel it with me. I will be sitting here like Palpatine in episode 3, just cackling and talking about the primaries and stuff, and you guys could just yell at me.
I'm gonna end up pissed off at everyone because it's what happened last time. I was a Bernie supporter, but I also found myself regularly defending Hillary from blatantly sexist critiques. Like, no, I will rip Hillary's policies apart. I have policy complaints out the wazoo. But that thing you just said, fuck you.
Same here.
Constantly.
I know that actually was sexist. Yes.
There were lots of Bernie supporters who were sexist, but there were also lots of Bernie supporters who were women. So I also did the opposite thing because I had to defend Hillary from sexist attacks, but I also had to be like, all Bernie supporters are white men. And I'm like, not entirely accurate. And that's how it went. I also got pissed at mostly everyone, or semi-pissed, because I could always just take a time out and be like, this is not my problem.
Yeah, no, I have a couple friends on my Facebook feed who are very politically engaged, you know, persons of color, various different backgrounds who were Bernie supporters, and I watched the flack they were getting and how much they had to defend the fact that they supported him because they weren't white. It was so mind-numbingly stupid. Like it was infuriating.
I wonder who the Lincoln Web or the Chafee is going to be this election. I just wonder who that's going to be. Like, remember those guys at the beginning of the primary? The one guy was like, "Oh, who was your worst enemy in politics?" And it was like, "Oh, that guy that shot the shit in Vietnam, but he isn't a problem anymore." All of those weird random people who were just in. This is going to be great. And we got Elizabeth Warren, and the sexist attacks have already started.
Yep,
already started, and you know. It's going to be a bloodbath. But now we've talked about Sorcerer's Crusade. We've talked about the Victor kids are trying to actually make a Chronicle startup for Mage. I'm going to tell you guys about the best idea ever. I've told Phil about this. I will tell you too about a Dark Ages Mage console I just randomly came up with one day. I call it the Reverse Tremere game.
Oh, that, yeah.
Yeah, that. I think it's amazing. I might be overhyping it because I've been like, we see it all the time in Vampire. Like, oh, you know, this vampire, blah, blah. Oh, it's mages or werewolves or kinfolk that became vampires or changeling blood people. I'm like, why do we never see the reverse of this? So I was like thinking, what would be the reverse of, like, let's say the Tremere? The opposite would be a group of Smitse who become mages.
Yeah, I think.
In lore terms, that shouldn't really happen. But I'm like, let's hand wave that. I don't give a shit.
I mean, it would be a fun one-off game. I can't help but think of the little diatribe at the end of Blood Treachery about can you get more successes than God about undoing vampirism. One of my favorite snippets from the revised era.
Funny you should mention all of this because back when there was a point where I was getting ready to run a crossover game for my then wife and actually Rochelle. Rochelle was in this group and someone else whose name I've forgotten, but I was getting ready to run a crossover Sorcerer's Crusade and Vampire, not Dark Ages, it would have been Vampire Renaissance game, which I'll tie back into this in a second, how this is also amusing because of Rochelle, but I wish she was here for this. But the part of the idea was going to involve a Tzimisce incursion into into England, into Renaissance England under Henry VIII. And so I was laying the groundwork for all of this when I left White Wolf and just said fuck it and you know kind of decided I didn't want to do that after all. But it's just funny that you mentioned crossing over Tzimisce with Mage because that's exactly what I was working on. Now here's where this comes in. Here's where this comes from in real world, and I want to actually bring this up again when we have Rochelle on the show because Rochelle worked as cast in the Atlanta Renaissance Festival, and there was one year where she finally had enough. The creative director for the show in previous seasons they had the King Arthur theme. The storyline behind the storyline for the Renaissance Festival was King Arthur, and then one year it was Robin Hood. Yeah, neither King Arthur nor Robin Hood is remotely Renaissance, but it's like okay, this is what Americans think the medieval era was. Okay, fine, whatever, dramatic license. But Rochelle hit the point of fuck you know when the creative director announced that this year's theme was going to be King Arthur versus Robin Hood.
What?
Right. Exactly. And Rochelle was like, no. She's like, first of all, King Arthur is not medieval. Robin Hood is not medieval. King Arthur and Robin Hood are mythological figures. They were separated by about 400 years. And they're separated from the real Renaissance by about 1,000 years. No, we can't do that. Why not do something based in the real Renaissance? And the creative director sneers, the real Renaissance was boring.
What?
And, And Rochelle's telling me about this. We were out having a few beers, and Rochelle's telling me about this, and I'm like, in what fucking universe is the real Renaissance boring? And you all know from our conversation before the podcast started how emphatic Rochelle can get. So imagine Rochelle and I both being like, "What the fuck is boring about the fucking Renaissance?" And I'm like, oh, you know, you've got Shakespeare, you've got Shakespeare, you've got Elizabeth I, you've got Richelieu, you've got Dracula, and she's like, I forget which one of us said it, but like King Henry VIII versus Dracula, and we both stop, and I'm like, that's actually kind of a cool idea. So that's what the Sorcerer's Crusade game that I was going to Sorcerer's Crusade vampire game I was going to run was going to be Vlad Tepes after he'd become Tzimisce. Vlad Tepes making a vampiric incursion during King Henry VIII's flip to the Anglican Church, turning on the Catholic Church, because Vlad Tepes had been like, oh, I can do. Partly he'd been because Vlad Tepes was Catholic, he'd be like, oh, I'm going to defend the faith by going and invading, and the other part of him would be going, oh, good, we just got rid of all those pesky churches. He's a heretic now. They can't stop me.
Anyway, just to link that back to my idea, since it's appropriate to do this in the right time period, I sat down and wrote down the rules for this for Dark Ages Mage, which I know that you haven't. I don't know. I think you didn't have anything to do with Dark Ages Mage, right, Phil?
No, I was. That's Bill Bridges. I was long gone by then.
Have you? I know that you read every Mage book before writing M20, but have you actually read Dark Ages Mage at any?
I skimmed it. I did. I wasn't able to sit down and read the books in depth because there were over 100 of them. But I skimmed it, and I thought it was very, very well done. I love the art. Oh my god. And I'd kind of like to do some stuff with with Dark Ages Mage, because I really like a lot of things Bill did with it, but I didn't go into it in great detail. Because I didn't have time. I had 100 other books to read.
We got Destiny's Prize and Orphan Survival Guide, other great books that, unlike Dark Ages Mage, you had something to do with. But before we continue with that, real random tangent, Victor, what do you think about Dark Ages Mage? And we're on the subject.
I think Dark Ages Mage is a really beautiful game. I don't love the magic system quite as much as the spheres, but on the flip side, it's more approachable while still being pretty flexible. So I don't know. Like, I have so many different thoughts on Dark Ages Mage. I've gone round and round with my partner about this. He just unabashedly loves it. I love parts of it, but the thing that's weird for me is I find the things I love the most about Modern Mage and Mage Sorcerer's Crusade are the messy things that frustrate other fans. I think Dark Ages Mage is probably a tighter, more approachable thing for a lot of people, which I think is some of what I struggle with, actually. So I don't know that I'm a good metric.
But at the same time, the spheres, which are everyone uses, in Dark Ages Mage, there's a different magical tool set for everyone. They take the paradigm limitations to its nth degree.
Yeah, they do. And I think that's actually part of what makes it more approachable is in my Sorcerer's Crusade game, we were well into the period where it was a master game and it was kind of high flying and ridiculous. And one of my players said, hey, my boyfriend, who I've been seeing for quite a while, long distance, is moving to Chicago. Can he join the game? I'm like, okay, cool. Is he, what's his experience doing? This will be his first role-playing game. And I was like, he can join if he wants to. I'm not going to say no, but, and this individual wrote for White Wolf as well. So he was able to help him. He ended up being an amazing role player, in his late 40s, but just dived in, did amazing role playing, but he was so intimidated. And it, especially being that late where we were being, but in a master game, you kind of have to be loose and crazy with some of the paradigm just because it's getting so ridiculous. I enforced paradigm, but if it worked narratively, I more or less gave a thumbs up on it. and getting him all the way up to speed and understanding all of that live while playing it was challenging for him. Yeah. It was very challenging. He rolled with that so graciously, and he did such an amazing job. But at the end of the Chronicle, he's like, I don't know why you all keep telling me I'm a great role player. That was awful. I was terrible. And we were like, no, you weren't. You really, really weren't. I feel like Dark Ages Mage having all that baked in a little bit more. Well, again, it's one of the things it doesn't personally resonate with me. I think it would have made his life a lot easier.
Maybe. I'm more on Team Victor's partner than I'm Team Victor in this to an extent. I don't massively love it in every way. I see things that I like and I see things I dislike about it. But I think it's an enjoyable thing. And it becomes sometimes more fun to just make your own splats in that because I can make my own pillars and foundations for it, which I did here. But I have to take up. I have a beef with you, Phil, because I randomly realized I have beef with you, and that's the best way to get noted. Rappers really get popular when they get into beefs. So I have beef with you, and this will skyrocket my popularity. And
oh no,
because I've seen this often. You throw shade at like people who are like, oh, I'm going to create life. Or like deify themselves and stuff in a lot of your work. So like, oh, this is a bad thing. I think as a person who plays characters who wants to do that, I feel a bit attacked. I have to say. I'm just like what's wrong about making the laser oyster?
I'm just saying.
When was the last time you were on the internet? People fuck shit up. Even the best of intentions, we make a mess of stuff.
So like I'm just saying that I think that I have to write because Travelers is open license. I would have to write the Travelers license where I portray making life as a good thing. That's definitely going to be
good. Yeah, but I mean, if we're talking mage, hubris is a central theme. You can't do something as daring as making life and have that go well. So I mean,
I think it's significant that Frankenstein, the most applicable cultural myth about guys who try to create life, comes from a woman.
Yep.
I mean, Frankenstein was
writing in it. It's always been white guys.
Frankenstein was totally Mary Shelley's commentary on dudes who think that they'd be awesome at creating life. There's a great
considering that for most of recorded European history, men have been like, men are the real creators. They're actual people create life. Women are just incubators.
Oh, we still got that shit on the internet. Go to any I remember you were telling me a few months ago about how you said you hated yourself enough to go onto an incel group and actually read their shit for an hour or two.
I did have an alt-right. Like I'm convinced I hate myself somewhere deep inside. I just want to harm myself on a deep spiritual level, which is why I read alt-right blogs. And I read, but here's the thing: I'm also a sadist. So I find people like you, Phil, and I read I read it out loud to you. That's how I take out my hatred on the world. I'm obviously a worm creature of some kind that just hates itself because it's wrong, but also hates the world. But anyway, I'm just saying it's too much. It's too much. Like in every mage story, I'm like, oh yeah, people who want to deify themselves are puffed and like, oh, making sapient life forms, that's a bad thing. Like, where's the love for making squid people? That's sapient squid people with lasers. Why like I made a game, right? I was on a game rules. I played an Ephraite who was like wanted to master life and destroy death because that's sensible. And totally not out of line. But at one point I tried to get around the restrictions of trying to make sapient life because I didn't have enough mind. I was like, what if I changed a sperm cell, a human sperm cell, so it could trace DNA from the giant bat monster I'd made, dog, and two like revenant ghouls that I bought of slave market, international night folk slave market. And so I could make like a new species of like partially batified humanoid things. And people condemn me for doing that. I
feel like condemning you for doing that is the Iaccook Ethics Committee signs off on this condemnation.
I just want to make new sapient life forms because humans suck, and we want to. They're not cool. Like all of our other humanoid cousins are dead. And I'm like, that's boring. Where's the other sapient life forms that we can have around? Like even elves. Why don't we have some elves or something? That's that would be making life much more interesting. Or if there was like bat people.
Well, if you get into some of the alternative paleontology theories, we did have them and we killed them. They were called Neanderthals.
Yeah. Details. But now we would maybe not kill them. Because it's not like the racists would immediately transfer their hatred to those anyway. Obviously.
Yeah, I was going to say so about Trump and Trump's America.
Yeah. That's why I was like, in most games, that's usually my goals, is to either create life, like sapient life, not just like an oyster or something, but like actual sapient life forms, or other weird projects like that, like the meat satellite, where it was a satellite but coated in meat. Well, it had an orbital gun on it, and I was going to awaken its spirit, so it would be a sapient meat satellite with a giant gun pointing downwards.
Yeah, well, it's been one of the central themes of Mage. We should probably wrap up as we've been talking about.
We should probably wrap up because we've been sitting around 8 hours, which is why I have this light-hearted topic as like a sort of ending thing.
My stomach is reminding me that I haven't eaten in a while.
I've also not eaten today, and it's 10.
So, and my bladder is reminding me that I've been sitting here for a while.
Yeah.
But,
so we've had a lot of fun topics, I think. We've gotten the plugs out of the way. Got some monsters are soon out, we hope.
Should be. I just got the second draft layout proof yesterday. I got it yesterday, and I've been going over it yesterday and today, and that will hopefully not go to press in the next week or so. I don't see any major problems. There's being one art piece is being adjusted, but that should be going shortly. Book of the Fallen has wound up in sort of an approval turnaround situation with all of the uproar over the Camarilla book. Both White Wolf and Onyx Path, and for that matter myself, have been putting the Book of the Fallen under a microscope several times. People are still going to be pissed about it. We just want to make sure that they're not right.
Yeah.
So I don't honestly know when that one has already gone to editing, but when it's going to go to layout, I couldn't tell you. Book of the Gods and Monsters should be going. It will be going to press within the next 3 weeks, possibly within the next week, depending on how things go with the layout corrections on this draft.
You might wonder why I'm because I've been pushing a lot for Gods and Monsters in the past few podcasts. You might be wondering why. The reason is that unlike Book of the Fallen, I didn't manage to sneak my way onto the brain trust for that once. I haven't seen it.
Oh, something before we go, I really want to acknowledge my collaborators on the Swashbuckler's Handbook, Phil Masters and Rebecca Moss, because I did the majority of writing on the book, but still, Phil contributed the majority of the historical information in chapter 1 and parts of chapter 2 with the character concepts. And Rebecca Moss, I'm trying to remember because it has been literally 20 years since I worked on this book. I know that Rebecca was involved as part of the Brain Trust. She had written a few things, but I'm not certain. I think she wrote the folk charms section on page 101, and I recall that she was part of the discussions. I don't off the top of my head remember what if anything else in the book she actually wrote, but I want to make sure that their names get out there because I'm big on acknowledging the people who worked on things with me.
Okay. Well, it's good that we're getting them out here on this on this massive platform, so they will not be forgotten. And I think, but that's very nice of you, Phil. So that means really, like realistically, in like 20 years, if you're still around doing this, that you might mention me and Victor offhandedly.
Yeah. Well, Victor's already been in one of the mage books anyway. I mean, he contributed to the
yes.
book, and will probably be involved. I know that you're in the Brain Trust. Might be in some other.
I'm doing some writing on Victorian Mage as well.
Okay, I thought so. I wasn't sure what all was happening with that one currently, because I handed that one off to Dixie for development, because I was like, these huge books are burning me out. The Book of Secrets was 250,000 words. Gods and Monsters
book is
about Gods and Monsters is about 190. Book of the Fallen is 180 something. Technocracy Reloaded will be 200. Victorian Mage will be 200. And I was just like, I can't do all these big books. It's killing me. So I handed that one off. I'm working on it, but Dixie is the one who's in charge of Dixie Cochran, for people who don't know her. Dixie Cochran is the developer on that book. I'm working with her, but I don't have all the moving pieces yet. So I'm glad you're working on that book with her.
Yeah, and it's a really good group. I'm going back and looking at the stuff that I wrote recently this weekend to kind of update it to the new outline and start to expand it. And I'm really excited about that project.
Cool. I think it's going to be awesome.
Life Keepers.
Sorry, go ahead.
Isn't that like the sequel group to the Gabrielites, the Life Keepers that are in that time period?
Yeah.
I'm, as usual, most interested in the fledgling technocracy, which is the accurate time. So that's going to be cool. And Victor is writing it, which means I have to support it. I'm just saying, few years or decades, I would like to mention in your memoirs or something, would be nice, or like a guest appearance or something. Something, Phil.
The marathon podcasts.
Remember me as I am, not but slightly funny. We could get something going there. Would be nice.
Yep, and that sounds like a good place to dovetail off. So
yes,
hopefully next.
So I think we will see you all around much sooner than usual. I think because I think we have more openings in our schedule than before. At least you feel
than before. Yeah. And hopefully we will be able to actually have Rochelle and not have technical difficulties.
Yes, we need to have her on. We're not giving up until she's on. I'm just going to drag out this sub-series until we get her on. And we can get her more on after that too. But that's going to be a thing. And she is going to be invaluable when we are talking about the primaries, which we will do a lot in the next episode. I feel. You can just feel my joy at this prospect. Anyway, we will end things here. Have a good night or day or Cthulhu day. Rest in peace. Bye.
All right.
All right. Good talking with you both. Always great. And Carl, thank you very much for having me on and having us all on. And I'll talk to you all next time. And for anybody who is still listening, thank you very much for listening. Have a good one, everybody. And Happy New Year.
Thanks. Happy New Year.